Good evening and welcome everyone to Woodlands Community Centre. Just a bit of housekeeping before we begin. We are not expecting a fire alarm to sound this evening, but if it does, please leave the building through the fire exits, follow staff, and we will meet in front of the building. Councillors will be using devices to access the agenda this evening. That's the papers and the minutes, etc. So they are using them for the purposes of this meeting, just to make that clear. Now, we always welcome people to speak at this meeting, although it is a formal committee meeting of Eastleigh Borough Council and not a public meeting. Members of the public that have registered to speak will be invited to speak at the relevant item and will be given a total of 3 minutes. We have a traffic light system, and when it goes to amber, you have 30 seconds remaining. However, once the debate starts, it is not possible to invite or receive comments from the floor. We want to be as inclusive as possible, but we will not tolerate any disruptions to our meetings. And should there be any disruption, we do have the power under the Council's constitution to remove people from the meeting or continue in private, neither of which would we like to do or wish to take. It's not something we do lightly or wish to do. Councillors are reminded that to take part in the meeting this evening, you must have an open mind so that you can reach all the relevant considerations presented to you in this meeting and take everything you hear into account in reaching your decision. By attending today, you have decided that you will listen to all points of views expressed by the speakers and the public, and you are able to participate and cannot be seen to have predetermined any applications. This meeting will be recorded and will be uploaded onto the Council's website. If any members of the public prefer not to be recorded, then do please let a member of staff know, and I'm happy to pause now if anybody would like to. Okay, if nobody's coming forward, all right. If you're planning, on filming or recording this meeting, then do please let us know so that we can ensure you are not filming members of the public that do not wish to be filmed. I do have the right to ask any filming considered intrusive to be stopped, and more information is available on the Council's website. I now move on to item 1, apologies. Catherine, have we actually got any? I didn't think we did. We've got a full complement, so welcome everybody. And it's good to see Jin back, who is our new Vice Chair. Item 2 is public participation, and I don't believe we have any members of the public down to speak specifically just in public participation, and everybody who is registered does so against an agenda item. So I'm going to move on to item 3, which is declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest they wish to make? Councillor Tidridge.
Yes, I'd like to declare an interest for item number 9, Stoke Park Farm consultation report. I'd like to declare that I am a shareholder of Judges Gully, which owns a field adjacent to Stoke Park Farm. I've checked it with EBC's legal team, and it's not considered to be a pecuniary interest and should not stop me from participating in the discussion and any voting relating to that item.
Any other Councillor Couldrey.
I live next door to Stoke Park Farm, so I don't have any pecuniary interest, but it should be recorded, I think.
Are there any other interests? All members are allowed to raise the fact that they do have interests if they become apparent during the course of the meeting. I also want to raise an interest under Stoke Park Farm, which is I am a member of the New Forest National Park Authority. And within this report it refers to SANGs. Now this again is a personal, non-pecuniary interest. Okay, moving on to the minutes. These are the minutes of our last meeting, and I do understand that any members that weren't present may wish to abstain. Can I ask that we approve them as a true record. So can I have a proposer, Councillor Broomfield, and a seconder, Cllr Caws, or just be
So
Councillor?
can I just say, it seems like it was only a couple of weeks ago.
It's strange, that. It really does feel like just a couple of weeks ago. Thank you. Members, a show of hands, all those in favour of accepting the minutes? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. We now go on to item 5, which is the Chair's announcement. And as our meeting was just so briefly ago, there is not a lot to report on. But I did want to let members know that the Fair Oak and Horton Heath Parish Council have worked really hard, and the library is due to be opened very soon. And we as a committee supported that initiative, and I think it's to be applauded about the work that Fair Oak have done to get this new building ready for the community so swiftly. I also think that Fair Oak Parish Council should be commended for some of their pollinating planters that I have now seen. They look amazing, and I think it's really good for the people of Fair Oak. But other than that, we haven't really had our usual team meeting because we've now got this special emergency local area committee meeting. So without further ado, I will move on to our substantive items, which is item 6, the presentation on planning guidelines.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Just a quick presentation on guidelines to assist you this evening. Technical issues, right. We're going too far. Okay, all proposals must be determined on planning grounds and in line with the development plan unless there are material considerations which indicate otherwise. At present, the development plan is the East Borough Local Plan 2016 to 36, as well as the Hampshire Minerals and Waste Plan, which won't be relevant to any of our items this evening. Relevant considerations in addition to the plan are any adopted supplementary planning documents, such as quality places, residential parking standards, planning obligations, etc., or any relevant national government policy, specifically the National Planning Policy Framework and its presumption in favour of sustainable development. The framework was updated in 2021 and is a significant material consideration and may, where necessary, take precedent over the development plan. Essentially, the NPPF, or the National Planning Policy Framework, is intended to provide sustainable development and has a presumption in favour of sustainable development. And there are 3 threads to that: economic, social and environmental. All 3 are interdependent. We can't just look at one and ignore the other. So for a development to be sustainable in terms of the NPPF, it must be sustainable and meet all 3 of those threads, all 3 of those requirements. Other material considerations may be planning history or previous applications related to the site, any appeal decisions or site-specific policies, any site-specific matters such as highways or biodiversity, amenity, contaminated land, noise, etc. Consultee and third-party comments where they are related to planning, precedent and case law of previous applications, and housing land supply as well. Non-planning related issues, any opinions on moral, racial, or religious views or devaluation or otherwise of property or land, loss of any private view or breach of covenants or matters covered by other legislation such as building regulations, or any personal views that people may have on the applicants or the reason for an application, or any matters, civil matters such as boundary disputes, etc. Just a reminder on conditions as well. We're required to permit development, consider whether a development is acceptable or not, or if it can be made acceptable through the use of conditions. When we apply conditions, they have to meet the 6 tests, which are set out there. They have to be necessary, relevant to the application, relevant to planning, forcible, precise, and reasonable in all other respects. One final point of reference is retrospective applications, of which one of the applications is this evening. Retrospective applications have to be considered as as any other application would, so the fact that something is retrospective cannot be used as a negative against approving or otherwise the scheme. You still have to consider it purely on its planning grounds, whether it be retrospective or a proposal. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Do any members have any questions for Gary? Okay, I'm moving on to item 7 then, which is the planning application for 32 Bradshaw Close, Fair Oak, H23 94919. I'm going to ask Dorothy to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. Agenda 7 is a householder planning application for 32 Bradshaw Close. This is a retrospective approval for retrospective application for approval for retention of boundary fence and raised patio. And the updates for this application are, we have adjusted the height of the first 3 panels from the rear of the dwelling from 2.4 meters above the ground level to 1.8 meters above the level of the patio. And due to this change, the applicant has made amendment to the submitted drawings, so the drawings number in condition 1 have been updated. And to precisely specify the target fence panel for replacement and avoid redundancy, I've also made amendment to the wording of condition 3 and merged it with it to condition 2. So there are only 2 conditions for this application now. And that's all for the update. So this is the application site. You can see here outlined in red. And this is a 2-story detached property and sits on a corner plot at the junction of Bradshaw Close and Mortimer's Lane. And this application does not lie within a conservation area or within any other sensitive area destination, so the basic principle of the development is considered acceptable. So this application includes 2 main elements. The first one is the replacement boundary fence from the roadside to the western and northern boundary. And it was originally a screen wall. This is the former boundary treatment, and now has been replaced by the vertical wooden panels enclosing the whole rear garden. And this is a very typical form of boundary, and the fence line is flat and in a similar position and height with the previous wall, and it is still sitting within the boundary line, so there is no concerns from the planning point of view. And it was also noted from the site visit that there are lots of different kinds of boundary treatment in this area, and even from the roadside, have hedges, brick wall, and screen wall. So the new fence does not draw any attention and can blend in well with the surroundings. There is also sufficient distance between the fences and the highway, the road, which can soften its visual impact, offering an open aspect to the area. There is also a bus stop outside of the house, so compared with the previous wall, the new fence can provide an added level of security to the property, ensuring the privacy and protection of the occupants. And this is the second element of the proposal, which is the raised patio. The raised patio is located at the rear of the property, which measures 5.1 meters in depth and runs the full width of the site. The land is not flat, so has a slight southern incline, so the height of the patio is varied to accommodate the site constraint. By elevating the ground level, the raised patio is considered functional. It helps to organize the uneven land more effectively. It can also contribute to the visual appeal of the rear garden. And given that this is located to the rear of the property, so the raised patio is not visible from any elevations and does not have any significant impact on the street scenes. And it was noted that there was a small patio at the rear garden before, so the current patio is basically largely utilizing the footprint of the former one, and the application site can still retain a sufficient amenity space and does not result in overdevelopment. And to address the issues of overlooking caused by the raised patio, a proposed solution is to replace the existing southern fencing that along the patio, And we can see that the existing boundary treatment consists of 1.8 meter fence panel and concrete kickboards at the bottom. So the distance from the top of the patio and to the top of the fences is 1.5 meters. And so this is, that would be a potential overlooking issues. And we know that the level is just 1.5 meters at the moment. So to effectively address the overlooking concern, we request a 1.8 meter now. So that is a 30 centimeters additional height after replacing the new fence. So 1.8 meters height is a commonly accepted standard that effectively provides the desired level of privacy. So you can see that there is a 30 centimeters increase on the existing, like a A4 size paper height, and it can reduce the chance of unintentional observation from the raised patio and providing a greater sense of privacy for the neighbors. And 1.8 meter fence on the patio side of the boundary, and this is the photos taken from the neighbors, and it will be 2.1 meters in height after replacing the new fence. So it's not going to have any dramatically difference when compared with the existing fence. And the new fence is located on the northern side of the neighbor's property, so it will not cause any significant loss of light or overshadowing for number 31. So this is my brief assessment, which I have discussed throughout the presentation. In conclusion, the two elements of the proposal do not have any significant impact on the street scenes and the characters of the area. Both elements can enhance the overall livability for the occupants, and by adding a condition and require increasing the boundary height on the first 3 panels from the rear of the property, it will be sufficient to provide the adequate privacy to the adjacent neighbors, and its height and position are not considered to cause any harmful impact in terms of overshadowing, loss of light, and loss of privacy. Also, it has no unacceptable impact on the amenity of the neighbor resident. So the recommendation is to permit subject to conditions set out in the agenda. So thank you very much for listening. I have nothing further to add unless there are any questions.
We'll come to questions after we've heard from our residents who have decided to speak. Thank you, Dorothy. So we have one person speaking in objection to this application. Ian Galley, can I ask you to come forward and to present to the committee? Thank you very much. You have 3 minutes, but don't rush. Okay. Thank you.
Yes. I do have a prepared presentation. It's based on the published report that comes with this meeting notification. And the dimension that was just talked about of 2.1 meters is in the report as 2.4. My comments that I prepared precisely for 3 minutes is based on the report included in the agenda, so I'm slightly struggling here as to what to say. I shall read, if I may, what I prepared. Yep. As immediate neighbours, we object to this application to increase the height of 3 panels of our shared boundary fencing by installing panels 2.4 metres high. For the past 12 months since the raised patio was completed, we have lived with a significant loss of privacy, which has been deemed unacceptable by the indicated refusal of the first retrospective planning application. The proposed new fence panels run 5 metres alongside our upper patio and will present to us as 2.6 metres due to the original difference in ground level across the boundary. They will be hugely overbearing and reduce our outlook and will be rather worrying in high winds as there's a funneling effect from the west. We consider it unfair and unreasonable and contrary to the policy DM1 in relation to considering residential amenity of existing residents, that the several issues of drawings for this retrospective planning application have not shown accurate and complete detail of the shared boundary conditions. they have not demonstrated how the proposal will or won't affect our amenity. The original planning application also provided scant information on the boundary condition and didn't show the raised patio. Our residential amenity has not been considered by the applicant nor their architect. I now comment on the report, which in our view contains some disturbing anomalies. The 2.4 metre high fencing is positively addressed in paragraph 23 in the section Layout, Design and Impact upon the Character of the Area. This is an inappropriate and unnecessary assessment, as the panels are completely remote from the character of the area. This paragraph should be ignored. Some of the wording in paragraph 23 is surprising for a planning officer to use. We are intrigued as to the author. The report addresses our key issues in paragraph 26 under residential amenity, and astoundingly does not refer to the proposed 3 panels of fencing to be raised so much. How can this be a fair and reasonable assessment of such a significant proposed structure on our boundary? Under conclusion in paragraph 36, we do not agree that the report contains adequate argument to assert that the development is not considered to adversely affect the residential amenity. We have not had any discussions with the planning officer on the current proposals. If we had the opportunity to discuss the applicant's proposals for the raised patio before work started, or before it was continued unchanged after we attempted to intervene, we could have suggested options that would deliver the same usable area of patio and would have significantly mitigated the impact on us. One option is to have the steps down to the lower garden located adjacent to the boundary. This would deliver what we think would be a completely reasonable balance of achieving the applicant's ambitions and protecting our residential amenity. There is a good resolution to this issue, but it's not, in our opinion, what is being proposed. I thank you for your attention and hope the committee will support our objection and will recommend refusal of this application.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, we should have restarted the timer because he was asking me a question about it. Sorry about that, but thank you very much. Members, we've got no speakers registered in support, so I'm going to move on to members' questions. Do any members have any questions for the planning officer for Dorothy, please? Thank you. Councillor Couldrey was first.
The patio is quite high, and that is why the application is to put a higher fence on. Is there any reason why the patio has to be so high?
Because the land is not flat, so we have to follow the topology.
Yes, I understand the land's not flat, and I noticed that it's quite high at one side, on the boundary of this gentleman here, and not at all high on the other, only a couple of bricks high. But there's no reason why they couldn't lower the boundary by the patio by a couple of bricks, and just move the earth that would be up on the northern boundary a very little bit. I mean, a couple of strokes from a rake would be enough.
From a recent site visit, because it have to level to the door of the side elevation, to the side addition, so we have to raise up to that level.
They have to raise it to what level?
Because I have photos to show. Yes, because you can see the side addition, the side extension. There is a back door.
There. Yes, I can see that.
So they have to elevate to that level to have to level up the patio.
Well, why can't they put a couple of steps down?
You would still need a landing area for building regulations.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
You would still need a landing area for building regulations to step out onto. So effectively you would have a fairly sizable landing space, enough to stand on comfortably and be able to swing a door open in the same area at the same height. So you're still going to end up with the same issues in terms of being able to overlook the boundary treatment. But ultimately, what you're suggesting are significant changes to what's already been built, and you've got to determine what you've got to determine is what is there acceptable or not.
No, I think the question is we're not allowed to take into account the retrospectivity, so we can't surely take into account the fact that it's a fait accompli.
Well, you've asked the question, could it be lowered? Yes, it could, but would you insist on it being lowered in order to make the application acceptable or not? And that will be something that, as members, you'd have to look at, and that's something that we would, should you be minded to go that way, would have to provide some advice to members as to whether that is a route worth going down or not, in planning terms.
Well, I don't know whether we understand enough about that option, but I think it's a very material one.
Thank you, Councillor Couldrey. Councillor Broomfield.
Thank you. Just a quick question looking at that. I understand that the area of the patio has quite large, it's increased quite a lot. Do you know how much the area of the patio has increased? Because some of the plans I've seen make the layout a little bit, I say confusing. I think that some of the plans are not perhaps as accurate as they might be. And certainly the patio, from photographs I've seen from before, does seem to have got an awful lot larger, which is what's caused quite a few of the problems. While you're at it, I'd also be interested to know how many meetings or discussions you've had with Mr. Galley and his partner about this, because it does appear that quite a lot's gone on without them necessarily being kept fully informed as to what's going on. So it's the size increase in the patio and what sort of interactions you've had with Mr. Galley would be interesting. Thank you.
It will increase 1/3 of the plots, the rear garden, and this is 5.1 in depth and the whole width of the plot. So yes, it's 1/3 of the rear garden. And we can see that they can still retain a sufficient amenity space at the bottom of the garden, so it does not consult any overdevelopment.
Any other questions for Councillor Broomfield?
Just another one. I'm less bothered about the fence line that's actually on Mortimer's Lane, but it obviously has a bus stop adjacent to it. And looking at the fence, it seems to me that it's sort of, I don't remember that sort of quite large slope leading up to it and the layer of sort of concrete or whatever it is underneath the fence. And I'm sort of vaguely thinking that the finished height of that fence has increased quite a bit. And you can see the bus stop there. So I'm sort of wondering whether it's possible some of that's been done to prevent people on the bus sitting at the bus stop looking into the garden, sort of protecting the privacy on that side. But has that height, fence height, is it higher than it was before all this started? It certainly looks it, but I don't know for sure.
The fence is slightly higher than the previous wall, but it's still 1.8 meters, the fence panel. But you can see the step appearance because of the bottom, the concrete kickbox, so they have a step appearance. But they just follow the topology of the land because the land is not flat.
Councillor Marsh.
Sorry, can you go back to the image of the patio, please? I'm concerned about it because I understand that they've put on an extension, that there was an existing patio there. I'm guessing it wasn't so close to the boundary originally because if the extension's been added on. And I do feel for the residents next door because they obviously have no privacy at all now, because if that gentleman who's standing there were to walk to that fence, he would clearly be looking over and they would have no privacy whatsoever. But equally so, can you go, was that an image from the other side of that fence? I'm not sure how we can say it doesn't have any impact on residential amenity if they're going to have an enormous fence next to them, because while it seems like a very small fence from the other side, from this side, that's quite an intrusive structure to be having. And while it isn't blocking out a lot of light, they have lost their privacy. I guess the play-off is, you know, do they lose their privacy, or do they have this great big imposing thing? Would that that block that you've put there, is that the only place the fence is going to be higher, or would it extend for the full length of the patio, or is that the full length?
Yes, we just request to replace the 3 fence panel from the, so I have squared it.
So where does the patio end on that? So can they just walk to the end of the
yes,
patio?
Yes, those 3 panels, those 3 panels.
So that would be the full length of the patio?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And it will be 2.1 meters from the neighbor side and 1.8 meters from the patio side.
So where did the figure 2.4 come from? Because it was 2.4 in the reports.
Oh yeah, because in the final discussion with the applicant, we find that we have the interpretation of the fence is different. At the very beginning, the applicants will think that they have to remove the whole fence, include the concrete block. So we decided to 2.4 meters above the ground level. But as what I have said, the ground level is not flat. So we think that it will be more like sensible and practical to just saying that 1.8 meters from the level of the patio, above the level patio.
Councillor Tidridge and then Councillor Caws. Councillor Tidridge.
Just a quick question. Has right to light been considered for the neighbour in terms of the higher fence obscuring light coming into their ground floor through the neighbour's ground floor windows? Has the right to light been considered at all?
Yes, it would have been considered, but we're not talking we're talking that much extra on the fence, and as Dorothy already said, the fence is to the north, so there would still be ample sunlight and daylight to those rear windows. So yes, it has been considered, and it won't have any adverse impact in planning terms.
Councillor Caws. Is this a retrospective application because they have done the work without previous permission? Councillor Marsh.
So I guess what I'm puzzling over is, if this was coming to us and there was no patio there, no change to the fence yet, and they were about to build this for the first time, I guess the question I would ask is, would we be agreeing to a patio that could be so high to be looking over a fence, so we have to adjust fence heights? Is that something we traditionally do?
I'll jump in on that. I think, yes, had this come to us as a proposal rather than the work's already done, it may be an issue that would have got picked up, and we would have looked at, well, how can we address that? It may well be we could have said, well, actually, we'll just raise the boundary treatment, or it may have been, no, let's reduce the scale of that patio, pull it back off that boundary so we don't have those issues as such. However, as I say, you've got to consider it as it is. It's a retrospective application, yes, but you still got to consider it on nobody. You can't penalise somebody for doing something without requiring consent, essentially. Whether that be done on purpose or whether it be done purely out of not knowing that consent was required. Consent for the patio is only required because of its height at a certain point. Anything over 30 centimetres in height would normally be permitted development. So were it not for the level changes we have in the land here, the patio itself wouldn't require planning consent. But equally, we probably wouldn't have the issue in terms of the overlooking. So you still have to consider, as it has been presented to you this evening, and make a decision on whether you feel it's bad enough to approve or to refuse, ultimately, and if so, what are your grounds for refusal? If you decide to go down that line, then we can advise as to what the chances are at an appeal, should that be the ultimate outcome, or whether you might not like it, but with the condition Dorothy has suggested, would it make it acceptable And so you don't have to like it, but it's whether it's acceptable or whether it's so poor as to be unacceptable and worthy of being refused. That's the decision you need to make this evening.
Councillor Caws and then Councillor Couldrey.
Do you think that there is a possibility of some resolution being found between the objectioner and the applicant?
Sorry, Councillor Caws, unfortunately, tonight we have to just consider the planning application on the merit of how it's been presented to us, as if, almost as if there was no patio there at the moment. That's how we have to consider it. And would we permit it to go ahead, given the information that has been submitted to as the planning application? I hope that's correct. That's Councillor Couldrey.
My thinking was very much along the lines of Councillor Caws, but the respondent or the objector did have a suggestion which I'm not sure I quite understood, and I'm not sure I'm allowed to ask him now, but can someone tell me what he was suggesting?
As I understand it, is to move the steps closer to the fence.
So that people don't stand and look over the fence.
Well, basically, you can just see at the top of the picture above the yellow sort of mark of 2.1 metres, there's a French window.
Yeah.
So effectively, if you move the steps to be adjacent, there we go, where that keeps moving.
Where that pot is.
Where the fence, you see the sort of French window, if you came out, you'd come straight down the steps into the garden, which would make it an area where you're not standing, chatting, having drinks, whatever. So the steps along there would be a sort of through route, and then social use of the patio would move to this end, which would be away from the fence. So that would be a sort of, I think Mr. Galley was saying that would be an acceptable option.
Can we refer it back, the application?
So I'll have to get advice on that. Bear with me, Councillor Couldrey. Okay, members, I know we haven't yet entered debate, but because there's been this question asked about the heights of the patio and whether there would be opportunities for reconsideration, for example, of having the steps by the patio doors, and also for us to understand what patio was there previously and how it compares, we could put forward a motion to defer this until we've got all that information so that we're able to make an informed decision. But I will need somebody, if they want to go down the deferral route, to propose that, and then it would need a seconder. Councillor, everybody put their hand up. So Councillor Broomfield, would you like to, you're proposing that we defer this motion and seek further information to ensure that members are fully cited on what was previously there and to see if there's any opportunities to improve the design. Sorry, Councillor Couldrey, I can't hear you.
Could you convey to the applicant the desirability of coming to something that doesn't provoke any objectors?
I don't know if we can ever do that with any application.
Well, maybe someone was just telling what I said.
That's Councillor Broomfield's amendment is that we defer this application, and it's been seconded by Councillor Couldrey. Can I see... Oh, So we can now debate this amendment. If nobody wants to debate the amendment, no, is it not that way? We've got to debate it with your questions. Yeah. Because we haven't even got into discussion it, we're going to go questions. Yeah. Excellent. So, would anybody like to debate? Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, I'd like to debate because I think I feel quite strongly about this because although I understood what you're saying about we're looking at the proposal in front of us, I think it sets a very dangerous precedence if we're saying, oh, never mind, they've done it already, hey-ho, let's work out the best of a bad situation. And I think Captain Tom's daughter discovered that you can't necessarily always do that, and sometimes there are costs to it. And I think that we do need to consider this very carefully. I don't think the design is great because I don't think it's taken into account how the neighbours would feel and the loss of the privacy. And I understand the concept of having a landing area outside a door, but it could be a landing area to steps down, and that patio could have been narrower with steps down. It could have, if you took it from the steps, if you took it from those doors, you could have that whole area as steps down, and it would have had no impact whatsoever on the next door neighbour just by removing the end of the patio, and the whole rest of it could have been an enormous patio for more than enough entertaining up there, or whatever else you choose to do on a patio. So I do think it's about the design and the lack of consideration for the neighbours.
So you're quite welcome to vote against the amendment. We can go back to the substantive one, which is the actual planning application, which is then for us to consider whether we're going to accept it or reject it. So if the amendment fails, we will... Oh, excuse me, 2 seconds. Sorry, I think... Okay, so any other debate on the motion to defer? No. Oh, Councillor Caws, sorry.
It seems to me a matter of neighbours living well alongside each other. So if the matter is deferred and the two neighbours can work it out between them so that there is no objection at the next proposal, then it could be something that would be more readily agreed, I feel.
Thank you. Okay, if there's no more debate, we'll have a vote. All those in favour of deferring, please show. It's unanimous. Okay, so we are not going to go on to the recommendations as approved, as explicitly put previously.
Can I ask for clarification on additional information?
Councillor Broomfield.
Just very quickly, and I'm just thinking, I spoke to Mr. Galley when we thought this was going to come to the September meeting. You're actually away, aren't you, in September? Yeah. So it sort of drags things out a bit. I don't know when the next meeting after September is, but if we hold this at the next meeting in September, Mr. Galley won't be able to attend. So I don't know if that makes life difficult for anybody, not having him around.
A written a written statement can always be received, and the following meeting would be the 29th of November. That would be dependent upon the information that we receive, and then it will have to come back to this committee for decision. That wasn't how I thought that first application would go, quite in that manner. Right, so we're going to move on. Thank you, councillors, and thank you, Dorothy, for your presentation. We're going to move on to item 8, the planning application for Cockpit Farm Barn on Knoll Lane in Horton Heath, F23 94713. Oh yes, if anybody would like to leave, please feel free to do so. Can I please ask Alex to present the report? Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I've got the presentation in front of me correctly. Hold on. Okay. It's not quite working, so just forgive me if this is a little bit slow. So, thank you. Good evening, Chair and members. This is agenda item 8, which is a full planning application for the construction of 6 dwellings, including landscaping, parking, and associated works following demolition and site preparation at Cockpit Farm Barn. It's not moving. It's not working. Sorry. Where's the next? Right, okay. I can't see my notes.
Sorry, Chair, can we suggest a 2-minute adjournment?
Yes, let's break for 2 or 3 minutes to allow the officers to get the presentation up and running. Now Councillor Caws is back, we can resume. Alex, could you please present item 8? Thank you.
Yes, sorry about the delay, sorry. Yes, this is agenda item 8 in relation to a full planning application for the construction of 6 dwellings, including landscaping, parking and associated works following demolition and site preparation at Cockpit Farm Barn. The site is shown in red and the other land within the applicant's ownership is shown outlined in blue on the slide here. The site is located on the west side of Knoll Lane and was previously being used for agricultural purposes. There's a footpath running along the northern boundary, and the neighbouring building to the north is a residential property, Yew Tree Cottage. Hanscott Livery is to the east and it is visible from Knoll Lane. There are currently 3 access points directly onto Knoll Lane from the site, which are shown in the blue stars on the aerial image. As you can see on this slide, we have an extract from the local plan proposals map, which sets out the council's policies and proposals for future development. The application site is designated as countryside and within the Fair Oak and Horton Heath settlement gap. Other site allocations in the local area can also be seen, including housing development sites and areas of community open space and recreation. This next slide shows the site allocations and designations in closer proximity to the application site. This slide indicates the areas of the building outlined in red, which benefit from prior approval and change of use to office and residential, and this represents a fallback position. Prior approval is under the Class R for change of use to part of the building to office use, and also under Class Q, for change of use to 5 dwellings. This slide shows the proposed layout for the 6 dwellings, including the landscaping, parking and associated works, and the demolition of the existing building. There would be 2 4-bed detached dwellings, 2 3-bed semi-detached dwellings, and 2 4-bed linked detached dwellings with integral garages. The proposal incorporates an access road and parking in front of the properties, separated from Knoll Lane by planting. Vehicular access is to be via the existing access point at the centre of the site, and both the secondary accesses at the northern and southern ends of the site would be closed. This slide focuses on the residential development, which would be in a linear alignment set back from Knoll Lane, similar to the existing agricultural building. There would be proposed on-plot parking via the driveways or garages to the front, and the residential gardens would be to the rear. The proposals incorporate an internal access road and parking in front of the properties. And as I said, those other accesses would be closed off. There is 2 new footpaths proposed. One would be to connect through to the existing public footpath on the northern boundary. This would provide access to the recreation ground and parish hall. Another permissive pathway is proposed to the south, which is on the applicant's land, and this would provide opportunities for residents of the proposed and existing properties around to walk southwards to Horton Heath off of the carriageway. This slide is showing internal photographs of the site and shows the building is in quite a poor state and very dilapidated. There are close and mid-distance views of the site, and the topography is undulating, and the existing vegetation plays an important role in softening the site when viewed from Knoll Lane. Additional photographs from inside the application site showing all the hard standing and the access points which are to be closed off. This next slide shows the photographs taken showing views from the existing footpath to the north and views of Knoll Lane and distant views of the application site from Burnett's Lane. Moving on to elevations, first floor rooms are located within the roof space of each dwelling, and roof lights would be to the front and rear. The proposed materials would be dark stained timber cladding to the walls and a standing seam metal roof. So this is plots 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, floor plans of 1 to 2, 3 to 4, and 5 to 6. 5 and 6 would be the same, but in reverse. This next slide covers ecology matters and shows the pre- and post-development habitat potential for the site. Although some site clearance has taken place, the preliminary ecological appraisal identified high potential for breeding birds, moderate potential for hedgehogs, and low potential for foraging and commuting badgers. The proposed ponds would provide an uplift to the on-site units provided, along with the proposed bat house and other enhancements as listed, which are to be subject to conditions. Next on to landscaping, the site is largely screened from the wider surrounding area by existing landforms, vegetation and development. The proposed landscaping scheme would incorporate enhanced planting on all boundaries, including new trees to replace those removed, and additional tree planting along the proposed permissible footpath to the south. along Knoll Lane. Further landscaped areas are also proposed to the west of the new dwellings and would support the creation and enhancement requirements, including small wetland habitat, stacked log piles and drainage attenuation ponds and swale, so the ponds would provide a dual purpose. Drainage investigations have shown that there's clay soil geology, and test results have determined that the soils have negligible permeability and are unsuitable for infiltration drainage. The ponds proposed are not attenuation ponds, but would act as for water treatment, not storage purposes, and all necessary attenuation storage is provided in the porous matrix and pavement to around the hard standing of the properties. In terms of highway impacts, the existing lawful agricultural use would have generated large, slow-moving agricultural vehicles. The prior approval fallback for office space and residential units would generate approximately 113 traffic movements compared to the proposal before you, which would generate approximately 27 trips. Adequate car and cycle parking is provided in accordance with our council standards, and provision has been made for the servicing of the site based on the largest refuse vehicle. And yes, tracking diagrams for a typical car and refuse lorry have been provided. The highway officer has requested further updated plans to include tracking and footpath connection detail for the internal access road, and this would be a pre-commencement requirement through conditions. This slide shows an illustrative street scene and perspective of the proposed development, and although it would be unlikely to obtain a real view of the street scene shown due to the length of the proposed development and the site topography. The main update from the report is that the wording to condition 13 has been adjusted slightly to remove, to only require the criteria of policy criteria A of part 1. So, sorry, to only criteria A to E of part 2 is required to be complied with. So overall, the key considerations are that whilst the site is within the countryside and settlement gap, there is an extant prior approval for change of use to residential and office use. In terms of visual impact, the proposal is considered to be acceptable in terms of design and in keeping with the existing street scene and rural character of the area. The existing vegetation would be respected and enhanced, which would retain the softening of the site, which is important from the public realm. Although some trees are to be removed, these are to be replaced. In terms of ecology, management and mitigation has been suggested, and biodiversity net gain would be achieved through the enhanced habitats. Highway matters, the traffic generation is not considered to cause any demonstrable harm to highway safety, and further conditions requiring the further detail on turning heads and sightlines has been requested. A suitable drainage system has been proposed, again subject to confirming full details through conditions. There would be no significant impact on the residential amenity of neighbouring properties, and for energy efficiency there will be conditions requiring further sustainability measures to be implemented to reduce the impact of climate change. Finally, the recommendation is to permit, subject to receipt of the auto-tracking site plans and the response from Natural England, and this would then be delegated back to the Service Director for Planning and Environment in conjunction with the Chair and Vice Chair to grant planning permission subject to conditions and wording to be agreed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now have 3 members of the public who wish to speak in opposition to this item. So I would like to call Heath Tomlinson. You have
Good evening.
3 minutes.
I've lived opposite Cockpit Barn for 18 years. Back then, Knoll Lane was a country lane. Now it is the official Fair Oak bypass. I believe that the key issue in this application is road safety for the many pedestrians who use Knoll Lane, including me. I do not believe that the highway and parking statement is an adequate representation of the current traffic in Knoll Lane. Before this application is decided by the council, will they please carry out a comprehensive survey of the traffic density and traffic speeds in the section of Knoll Lane between the traffic lights on Botley Road and the access to Cockpit Barn in Knoll Lane? My second question is, for the safety of the many Horton Heath residents who take exercise down Durley Road or who access Knoll Park via the allotments in Knoll Lane, will the council commit to installing a pavement along the south side of Knoll Lane between Durley Lane and Goodwood Close? The footpath that is proposed in the planning application will only benefit the residents at the development, and only then when the ground is dry. My third question is, before this application is decided by the council, will they please guarantee that the narrow settlement gap between Fair Oak and Horton Heath, which is referred to in the local plan, will be maintained in the future? And I have some photographs of some of the crashes that have occurred at the bend, which you're welcome to have a look at.
I'm very sorry. We're not allowed to accept additional material on the evening. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you. The next person to speak is Catherine Rykoff. Welcome, Catherine. You've got 3 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. I live in the Maisels, directly opposite the access for the Cockpit Farm Barn. I've lived there for 4 years, and I've seen the clearance of the site, which was really distressing. I actually contacted the council at the time, and I said, do you know what is going on? Because there's numerous trees being ripped out, there were diggers, everything carrying on, and no one actually even knew about it at the time. So I was distressed then to get the planning application. Obviously, having walked down the footpath and seen badgers, foxes, snakes, all sorts of things in there, it's just now not there anymore. There's a massive fence along the footpath, which has just spoilt any sense of anything. As far as local amenity, it's a rural area, it's in the settlement gap, it's countryside, it's beautiful forest, was beautiful forest. I can't see how we can have a development there. It's just going to urbanize the whole area. And I would also like to point out that the previous owner of our property in 2017 applied for planning permission for 4 houses in our paddock. That was refused by the council. It went to appeal. It was refused again, based on the grounds of urbanization, detracting from the visual amenity of the area. It'd been in a settlement gap. It'd been in the countryside. So I'm just thinking now, like, that was a more suitable position, not that I would ever do it, than this proposed site. So I'm just seeing a bit of discrepancy, and I'm thinking, well, personally, I hope that you guys can obviously just stop it, or put something better. Even if it's 2 houses is better than 6, especially with the traffic on Knoll Lane. It is horrific. Coming out of my driveway in the morning, it's a hazard. It really is. I've counted some mornings, there's 12 cars coming one way, 12 cars coming the other way. It's not safe for any more cars, especially for children walking to school. I've seen children walking to school on that road, and their mother is guarding them, like pushing them into the bushes. It's really not safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The final person I have registered to speak is Raymond Stock. As objectors.
Thank you. I'm afraid I'm just going to echo the other two, really. I've lived in Horton Heath in Knoll Lane for 43 years. The lane was dangerous when my children went to school. I don't know how many fold it's increased now, but it's terrible. There's a friend of mine 2 doors up applied for planning permission for 1 bungalow and was refused it because of the volume of traffic in the road, and they were using a shared driveway because son was going to buy the house and refused it. I don't understand how it can be accepted now. And also, I also believe, and I can remember reading somewhere, that Hampshire Council, Hampshire Planning, wanted that area kept between Horton Heath and Fair Oak as a green area. I don't know, but I dare say you get it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I have one person registered to speak in support, which is Jacob Goodenough, on behalf of the applicant. I believe he's the agent. Thank you, Jacob. You have 3 minutes.
Councillors, thank you for the opportunity to address you today. The officer has provided a detailed and balanced assessment of the development and where it sits in terms of planning policy, as well as the planning history and relevant material considerations on this site. So it's not my intention to go over this in detail, other than to say that it's a suitable and environmentally responsible form of development on a sustainable site that has extant consent for both residential and commercial uses within the existing substantial barn. The proposal will also help assist the council in meeting its housing needs. The proposal before you this evening has been designed through extensive dialogue with your officers, who have had a positive influence on its design and layout. Through those discussions, there has been a focus on delivering an environmentally responsible development that is contextually appropriate to the site. This approach is consistent with the landscape-led approach that is endorsed by your local plan and responds positively to local design guidance. The proposal is for 6 new energy-efficient homes designed in an agricultural style, which will be reminiscent of the existing barn that is present on the site. The proposal makes provision for all parking on site, including the provision for electric vehicles, and each will be fitted with renewables, satisfying the requirements of your local plan and modern building regulations. In addition, the homes will be built in accordance with the higher M2 standard of building regulations, thereby ensuring that they are accessible and adaptable so they can readily accommodate the changing circumstances of their occupiers. The proposal also delivers a wider package of enhancements, including a comprehensive landscaping scheme focused on achieving biodiversity net gain on site. The surface water drainage proposals are an integral part of that landscaping scheme and will deliver a cohesive and environmentally conscious solution to the challenges of climate change. In addition to the biodiversity enhancement, the proposal will secure a safe, surfaced pedestrian route that will provide the missing link between Fair Oak Recreation Ground and the communities in Horton Heath on this part of Knoll Lane. The link will create a circular walking route that is safe for pedestrians, thereby promoting healthy lifestyles and encouraging the use of the community assets of the recreation ground. This link is of considerable benefit both to the communities of Fair Oak and Horton Heath, as well as the proposed new houses. In conclusion, we endorse the officer's recommendation and would encourage the committee to do the same. The proposal will deliver a bespoke redevelopment on site that is contextually appropriate, and it brings forward a wider package of enhancements that will benefit the existing communities. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. Members, do I have any questions of the officers? Councillor Tidridge first.
Yes, I don't know if this is a question that can be answered, but I'll ask it just in case. Obviously, the local plan is currently up for review. Has there been any discussion about scrapping Eastleigh Borough Council's policies on settlement gaps?
Not to my knowledge, and I doubt it will be. It was something that was looked at very in-depth during the during the inquiry, the plan inquiry.
The planning inspector, yes.
Yes. And changes were made at the time to what the inspector said, but certainly the gap here between Horton Heath and Fair Oak has always been a sensitive spot. And part of the review, I don't think there's any intention to look at gaps. I think it's more looking at housing numbers and other requirements rather than settlement gaps.
Thank you. I do have a second question, if I'm allowed to ask that. I'm a little bit concerned looking at the surface water flooding maps for the area. I assume that a proper assessment has been done to look as to how, I understand the site itself is not in a flood risk area, but it's remarkably close and sloping to the north to an area which is highlighted as experiencing surface water flooding that can go all the way over Botley Road. Has the impact of this development been assessed with respect to contributing towards that surface water flooding problem?
There has been test pits done initially, I think go back to that slide, and I've been assured that the treatment of to the front of the properties in terms of hard standing, there would be capacity for storage of any runoff there, and then that would be drained through a surface water drainage scheme, and further details of that are to be agreed in terms of specifically to the south of the site where the footpath is proposed. I don't believe that's been looked at, but mainly the residential area at the moment.
But the risk is to the north in terms of where surface water flooding happens in the area at the moment. So if we've got the slope right in terms of looking at the risk to flooding in the area.
The ecologist is happy for the surface water drainage details to be dealt with through condition, and was happy with the test bits that took place across the site, and is happy that there is capacity for runoff to be dealt with.
Should this application be passed, we've seen other developments in the area where surface water goes nowhere near the surface water drainage, nowhere near the suds. That's been something which has been a problem with a number of developments in the past. I'm thinking particularly of the one at Cllr Drive in Bishopstoke. I just would want more, I understand this is something you'll condition at a later stage. If the committee
Would it be a pre-commencement condition?
Yeah.
So.
I'd want that, if we were minded to pass this, it's something that would still be a major concern to me.
Can I just jump in on that? Correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that much of the existing barns are surrounded by concrete hard standing.
Yes, there's quite a high level of hard
So they're not permeable surfaces in any way, water will just run off. So theoretically, with more modern surface and proper drainage, which I doubt the site has at the moment, theoretically at least, it should be less of an issue than the present one. But obviously the technical details will still need to be finalised as part of the conditions.
I know that there's a whole host of hands, but it's Councillor Caws next. I'll go down the line.
Does the applicant own the land currently?
Yes.
And I noticed in the planning history, I'm just a bit confused as to why there's been application and approval granted for office use and dwelling use. Seems to be at the same time. Could you explain that?
So the applicants applied for prior approval, which is the simplified route which is possible on agricultural buildings for the office use and the residential use. Those applications were submitted at the same time. They were publicised and prior approval was given for those following consultation with highways, flooding and contamination. So that is an extant fallback position that is available to them to build out.
Councillor Broomfield.
Thank you. Excuse me. Before I ask my question, could I just address the speakers, Mr Thompson, Mr Stock and Catherine? I didn't catch your name, Fred. Many of the issues you raised are Hampshire County Council issues, traffic and road condition and things. I'm the local county councillor as well as borough councillor, so if you hang around when we finish this particular bit of the meeting, I'll have a quick catch up with you and then we can arrange perhaps to meet to discuss these things. The question I have is traffic. Do you have any idea of what sort of traffic movements the chicken factory, for want of a better word, used to generate when it was in action? Because presumably there would have been staff, there would have been deliveries, collections, etc., etc. I don't know how chicken farms work, so I'm just interested to know if you have any idea of what the traffic use used to be.
No, I don't have specific figures for the previous traffic generation, and it's been vacant for a little while, so I don't have any specific figures. All I know that there would have been larger, heavier vehicles moving slowly out of 3 access points, and depending on, it would all depend on egg production, I guess, or chicken. I don't know.
Councillor Marsh, did you have any questions? Councillor Couldrey.
Can I start on the planning system or the planning application? I was surprised when I was surprised actually some months ago when I discovered that this had a planning application. It hadn't been called in. I wasn't a councillor at the time, but it got a permission. And so what is the default position? How did they get that permission in the gap, which had been hard fought for on a political level? And suddenly these people get a planning permission without any reference to councillors and without, in complete contravention of a key policy that has been adopted at a political level by the council. I simply don't understand it. Could you please explain?
So yes, the prior approval route is a simplified route the government introduced to bring former agricultural buildings, existing agricultural buildings into different uses, and so therefore the principle of development is technically already accepted if it's classified correctly as a former agricultural building. The applications come in, and we had to. There was public notification, and flooding, highways, and contamination and design was taken into account at that time. There would have been the option for it to go to committee if it had been called in. However, there's only a 56-day period for us to decide that application. And so after consultation, even if it may contravene local planning policies, which restrict residential development in countryside areas, there is still an in-principle support for those types of applications. And this is why this application is unique, because there aren't many sites like this in gaps that have buildings there, because essentially a gap is a gap with nothing in it. However, this is different in that it has a building already there. So this is why this is before you now, because there are unique circumstances which have led to this application before you.
So the then councillors had very little opportunity for calling this in, and it was submitted in the middle of when they were very busy in the middle of an election period, which I found a little odd, or very clever. So moving on then, despite the policy, they got this permission. What does that mean if we refuse this application?
There is a realistic possibility that the extant prior approval developments can proceed, and as I said previously, that could then lead to greater traffic generation. So there could be 500 square metres of office space on the building area to the south and 5 dwellings to the north.
Sorry, I don't think you quite understood my question. I probably didn't make it clear. If we refuse this application, am I correct in understanding that they will have a right to develop 5 houses there rather than 6 and an office?
Yes.
The issue is what, if you were minded to refuse, on what grounds you were to refuse. The existing consents, we can only consider a very small number of issues. So, as Alex pointed out, contamination, highways and so on. And it is conversion of the existing buildings, not a whole new, brand new buildings, it's conversion of the existing buildings. So yes, were this scheme to be refused, they have that fallback position. But that establishes...
But only to convert the existing buildings?
Yes, conversions.
Correct, yes. They can do substantial works, but essentially it's conversion of the existing buildings. But if you were minded to refuse the current scheme, you could potentially look at alternative reasons, but I would advise not on the principle because that is effectively established.
So you're advising that we can't refuse this on the basis that it's in the settlement gap?
I wouldn't put it as my main reason for refusal. Planning is never black and white, as you're finding out, Councillor.
So, Couldrey, your microphone's not on, so it's really hard to hear you over here.
Just a note for the committee. Settlement gap is not purely about principle of development. Settlement gap is about impact upon that gap. So we have countryside policies which set out the principle in terms of appropriate development within or outside the urban edge. And there's a separate policy in relation to countryside gaps and settlement gaps, and that is more about the physical and visual impact of a development upon the gap, rather than the principle of a specific development upon the gap.
Thank you. I think I might need that repeated at some point. But I think I've asked enough questions about the existing planning permission. Can I move on to that path? I'm not quite sure where it goes. There are two different paths, are there not?
So there is there's just a small link to lit from the sorry for the highlighter. Oh, here it is. Yeah, there would be a link from the access point up to the existing footpath here, and then a further new permissive path along this boundary here, adjacent to Knoll Lane, and further planting, and it would end approximately here.
Can I ask about the southern path? That is a permissive path, is it? And so, and it comes out into Knoll Lane at the bottom there. And so it can be withdrawn the moment this development is completed.
No, it would form part of the approved plans, and they would have to apply to remove that section. It's within part of the red line boundary, so it forms part of the development.
I think we've had experience elsewhere, permitted paths being subject to the permission of the landlord, which has been withdrawn. And consequently, I am a little concerned that this path may not be a path in 6 months' time or a year's time or whatever.
There's also conditions requiring details and layout to be further agreed and for it to be retained.
Okay, so that is not a path that can be withdrawn?
No.
Is it open to the public?
I'm not entirely sure whether it would be. Yes, yeah. Yes, it is, yeah.
Any more questions?
Yeah, and the other path to the right, sorry, the right of the picture, which is going north then, onto the existing path, that will also be open to the public?
Yes.
And not able to be withdrawn?
No.
Thank you.
Councillor Tidridge, did you have another question?
I did, yes. A couple of questions, actually. The first question relates to a point raised by one of the residents about her distress at seeing the site being cleared of vegetation. Should the landowner have, or whoever did the clearing, have obtained any form of permission before clearing that? Was it a lawful clearance?
As the trees are not currently protected, they didn't do anything against the law by removing those trees, so there wouldn't be anything to prosecute against, no.
Thank you. My second question is for the new proposed permissive path. This committee feels a little bruised over permissive paths. Being a particularly good example in the Bishopstoke retirement village, where somehow the land which was supposed to be for a permissive path somehow got sold and it never happened. And if this committee is minded to pass this proposal tonight, I think this committee would want to have a lot of reassurance that perhaps looking at a proper right-of-way as opposed to a permissive path might be something that we would want reassurance over. So we are a little bruised.
We may be able to include a condition requiring a separate legislation through Hampshire in order to have that path adopted as a right-of-way, I believe. So that could be a condition we put on the permission.
Thank you.
Or through Section 106 agreement, which would ensure it takes place as well within a required time frame.
Councillor Caws.
Would an appropriate reason for refusal be that it would set a precedent for further development?
I would say no, because again, this has a fallback situation and is unique in terms of the history and the fact there's already existing built form on the site. So it wouldn't set a precedent for further development elsewhere, which is open green space and important vegetation and biodiversity habitats. So no, we would ensure that that remains protected.
Just a general point on precedent, whilst you have to take existing precedents into account, you can't use setting or potentially setting a precedent as a reason to refuse an application.
Councillor Broomfield.
Just an absolute clarity, and I think Councillor Couldrey's already really got us to this point, but we're painted into a corner. If we don't approve this, we get the other one, which is 5 houses plus offices. So in a way, we're sort of dividing between the devil and the deep blue sea, and we have to choose which way we want to go. Is that pretty much what it is? Yeah, thank you. You don't have to say anything, your face shows everything.
Yeah, there's also to consider whether, obviously, the prospect of that being built, of the fallback being built out, there is an additional dwelling over the 5 that they have approval for, so there's technically one additional dwelling which is to compensate for the approved office space, but that is technically an additional dwelling in the countryside.
So my question is, what is the reduction between the previous application and this application in terms of traffic movements if this application was to be approved?
I think it was about, just I've got the figures here, sorry.
Sorry, it was about 30 in total, and how many have been predicted for the...
So for 500 square metres of office space and 5 residential units, there'd be 113 daily traffic movements, 90 for the office space and 23 for the residential, and compared to 27 trips for this proposal.
Thank you very much. Councillor Marsh.
Sorry, I was kind of holding back until the debate stage, but it seems almost more appropriate to say it now. I understand that they've got permission in principle for this office and these dwellings, but I'm assuming that, and maybe this is my question, is the detail of that isn't final yet. So in principle, they could use the existing building for an office, but if that were to be a full planning application, we would be able to restrict, for example, heights of buildings and things like that, would we, or not?
No, permission in principle is slightly different as well to prior approval. So whilst the principals agreed, further conditions were on that prior approval decision, which required further detailing in terms of contamination, noise, risk assessments, elements like that. It wouldn't come back as a full application for further agreement of any finer details.
So they could put a 7-storey office block on that?
No. Again, it's only conversion that's allowed through the prior approval process that they have. The permissions they have only allow them to work within the remits of the existing building.
So the existing building is currently a single storey, I think?
Yes, they would only have that building to work with, no further buildings, no further new buildings at all.
Thank you.
Is this a question or are we going... Okay, Councillor Tidridge.
Sorry, another question. The current buildings, what are they classed as in terms of...
One long linear for poultry house, so it's classed as agricultural.
Thank you.
Okay, so if there's no more questions, I'll just double check. Okay, so we can move this on to debate. Will need a proposer and a seconder so we can move it to debate. Anybody who proposes and seconds the recommendation does not mean that they are going to necessarily support or be in favour of it. So Cllr Broomfield is proposing. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Marsh, thank you very much. Can we enter debate? Councillor Marsh.
I wanted to thank the 3 speakers who spoke earlier because I think you raised some very key points. I like the idea, well, I felt it was an accurate description. The Fair Oak bypass was certainly an accurate description. And actually, I was travelling in a vehicle behind you when you were trying to reverse into your driveway and had a very near miss, which I witnessed. I'm concerned about this development. It is frustrating that we find ourselves in this position, and as councillors, I don't think we should ever find ourselves in this position. So something needs to change so that we aren't in this position in the future. But I have real concerns about the traffic in that area, the danger on that road. It is lethal. I travel down it most days, and that road is incredibly hazardous. On top of that, it just seems insane not to look at the existing precedent, which is refusal of a bungalow and the refusal of dwellings being built in a paddock. And knowing Lowell Lane as well as I do, every house has enough space for at least one more house in its garden. And I think the precedent has been set about needing to retain some of green space. I think the wording for the previous refusal was around urbanisation, and I therefore am very concerned about this, and I understand that something's going to go there, but 6 double-storey buildings with parking and everything else does cause me concern. And I think when I see developments like this, I'm glad so much attention has been taken to the ecology. I do think they're missing a trick with things like attenuation tanks under the hard stand or under the parking areas. Could improve that significantly. But I really would like to see development in our area being more sustainable. Why isn't every development using ground source heat pumps, solar panels, and more sustainable? The 3 things we were given in the beginning were economic, social, and sustainable. And actually, we're not seeing enough of the sustainable, which I'd like to see more of in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Marsh. Any other debate? Councillor Tidridge.
Yeah, I'd just like to start off by saying that this would not be my key reason for recommending for refusal if I decide to vote that way. But I am appalled that Eastleigh Borough Council's much lauded settlement gap policy just seems to be something which doesn't mean anything. It just seems to be, well, we'll decree settlement gaps, we'll make a big song and dance about just how important to our communities settlement gaps are, and then when it comes to reality, just bin them. I'm appalled. It just seems to be a very peculiar state of affairs that we've ended up here. I'm also really concerned that the site was cleared of vegetation. when you look at the Ordnance Survey map, you've got woodland clearly shown there, and I can't believe the site was cleared with no ecological impact. And that's something which, yeah, it's just a really sad state of affairs. Whether or not trees were protected or not, well, wildlife doesn't recognise whether or not there's a TPO in place to have an impact, to have a negative impact on it. I think that's just a really sad state of affairs. I think the highways argument is really important, especially when you consider One Horton Heath. One Horton Heath isn't in this bit, but certainly that will be massively increasing traffic flow in that area. Not every resident of One Horton Heath will be driving westwards. Some of them will be driving eastwards. And it's certainly increasing pressure on Botley Road, Winchester Road, etc. means that it will encourage more local commuters to be increasingly inventive with their choice of routes. And yes, it will make that road less safe. I understand what you're saying about if we are minded to refuse this, that simply reverts to the previous application. That's a really sad state of affairs. But I don't see how, I can't see any positives for this development on the basis of highways, on the basis of environment, on the basis of community. Because although it can't be a key reason for refusing it, settlement gaps, we've been told over and over again, are integral to maintaining distinctive sense of place, a distinctive community for Horton Heath, a distinctive community for Fair Oak. So I don't see how it can be passed on those grounds. And to take a lane which is intrinsically rural in nature and increasingly urbanise it, surely the whole point of planning is to try and have this sort of decision made by the representatives of the local community, not simply being down to, well, it just sort of happened. And that's what seems to be in this case. We've got an application coming through, it's just sort of happened. Increasing traffic on this road not only is bad in terms of road traffic accidents, it's also something which impacts pedestrians. The proposed new footpath might help to alleviate things a bit, but I don't see how it solves the lack of pavement all the way along Knoll Lane. As a cyclist, Knoll Lane is a really difficult road already, in that it's that bad combination of being narrow, semi-rural, but cars speed. And that's a really dangerous combination when you're a cyclist, in that the cars cannot give you enough space to when they overtake you. And those cars that are overtaking you are going at a fair old pace, regardless of what speed limits in place. So I think this is a really sad state of affairs, and I think that's my position on it.
Councillor Marsh.
I agree with you about the hazards of the road, but I think one of the things that we shouldn't underestimate is the traffic that is generated by the Waste Recycling Centre and the big lorries that are going along a very narrow lane, which is why so many near misses or accidents happen in that short distance. It is hazardous. I agree with you, and I'm glad you commented about the clearance of the site. Sadly, the law is against us on that one, as we've heard, but it is sad when potential developers clear the site and then ask permission afterwards, because it's not very respectful to the ecology and environment. It's very damaging, but I guess we are stuck with the law and can't stop them doing that. But
Any other? Councillor Couldrey?
Yes, we are stuck with the law and it sticks us from time to time on several matters, not just this one. I'm very pragmatic, and I'm looking at this and I say we have a choice, either of giving this new development permission and there's or staying with the existing permission, which is to convert the existing building. I have two major considerations. The first is traffic. I can't see that this is going to, that the new development is going to make traffic any better. The second is the keeping, so far as we can, the settlement gap in the countryside. This is a key differentiator between Fair Oak and Horton Heath, and I do want to keep that distinction. And so I would prefer a smaller development rather than a bigger development. Now, I do appreciate that the applicants have actually put a lot of effort into making this it's an improved development than you know, with new environmental starts, another footpath, etc. That is not what I'm criticising. I think if we were to go with a bigger development, this is possibly very acceptable. But I don't think we should go for a bigger development. I think we should say, okay, these people have the right for, in my view, totally wrong reasons, but that's a political view. It's not a legal view. It is totally within their rights to convert this in accordance with convert the building. And as that's one of the options, it's the option I prefer, and so I will be voting against this application.
Councillor Broomfield.
Thank you. We are where we are, I suppose is the best thing we can say. And if we reject this one, the chance, well, we know we'll get the houses and the offices. And I'm guessing that a small office block of whatever size will generate more traffic than a house. So in many ways, this is potentially the least worst option. We remember 2 weeks ago when we were here, we gave permission for, well, we basically stopped housing being built on a site further up on the other side of Knoll Lane. So every meeting we come to seems to have something in Knoll Lane that generates more traffic. What I would like to see, obviously there'll be Section 106 money, I would like to see a condition that some of this Section 106 money is diverted to work on traffic safety in Knoll Lane. We have an opportunity here where there might be some money. If some of that could be directed to roadworks, that would be extremely useful, and it would be, albeit not a massive one, it would be a small win. So that's my 2 penneth.
Okay, so there's a couple of things I need to come back to members on. One, unfortunately, because of the size of this development, there will be no Section 106, which is always sad. The other aspect, I am concerned because I do remember both myself, Councillor Broomfield and Councillor Couldrey calling in a development on this site last July. And I didn't understand the differences between prior notices because you can convert, because they're very different. So, so there was a full planning application which was put in last July that we all called in, and then that was withdrawn, and this is is a new application. And I am torn because I do sit here listening to residents complaining about the volume of traffic, and I am concerned about how much traffic that site will generate with an office block on it, with 3 exits going onto Knoll Lane, or this site with only the 1 exit and less traffic. So I do find that hard, and I'm also very mindful of the fact that it's in the settlement gap, and I fundamentally disagree. And I'm going to say this, Fair Oak and Horton Heath are really lucky. You're really lucky you've got a gap, because Bishopstoke doesn't. We have a pinch point up Olympic Way. We have, you wouldn't be even able to tell where Fair Oak stops and Bishopstoke starts if you go along the main road, because Bishopstoke has lost all its gap, and it's absolutely horrible. So I do understand not wishing to lose the countryside, it's really precious. But I am finding this quite difficult, because I'm trying to balance that dichotomy of increased traffic with the wishes of the residents and this application. So I'm not finding it easy, I have to admit. And I am finding it difficult that because it was already an agricultural building, that it can have a right to change its uses and its appearance. So I'm finding this difficult, I have to confess. Sorry, Councillor Marsh.
This might be slightly controversial, but in my mind, single story, so looking at the footprint of the existing building, I can't see how offices in that footprint will generate masses of traffic. I might be wrong, but when I look at 6 dwellings that are double stories, 2 stories that could have teenagers and 2, 3, 4 vehicles per household, I think actually 6 houses could generate quite a lot of traffic in its own right. So compared to a few bungalows where potentially it might be 1 car, maybe 2 cars, but that's just my opinion.
Sorry, Councillor Caws.
So I hear the residents about fear of increased traffic, loss of biodiversity. I think it's a horrible situation, and danger to the residents on the street as well. I'm finding this really difficult because I also feel that I don't know how a single story house, it would be 5 single-story houses and a single-story office. I'm struggling to see how that would generate more traffic, as well as Councillor Marsh, as 6 double-story houses. I know it's an office building, but it's a difficult situation.
So if there's no other debate, I think we should probably move to the vote. So all members in favour of accepting the recommendation as printed, please show. All members against the recommendation. That's unanimous. We have to wait. I'm going to call a break now because I now need to get some advice, because our concerns are obviously on the settlement gaps. I'm going to work with the officers to draft up a new recommendation. Thank you. Is anybody, are we missing anybody? No members of the public missing that? Oh, they've left. Okay. Just wondering whether we should check whether they would have. Yeah, could we just check? I just want to check they're not outside having 5-minute break so that they can hear if they wish. Oh, he's definitely left. Okay then. I'll wait for Kitty. I'd rather be safe than sorry. No, they're all good. No. Okay, members. I'm going to propose the following words. I would, however, obviously need a seconder. So the proposal is that our new recommendation is to refuse on grounds of increased impact and urbanising effect on the countryside and settlement gap, insufficient information to demonstrate vehicle and pedestrian safety, lack of mitigation to offset the impact of the development on the European protected sites from nitrogen loading, and for us to delegate back to the Service Director for Planning and Environment in conjunction with the Chair and the Vice Chair to agree the final words for reasons for refusal. So if I propose that, can I have a seconder? Councillor, it could have been Tidridge or Broomfield, but Councillor Tidridge. All in favour of accepting the refusal? That's unanimous. Thank you very much, members. We're now moving on to item 9, Stoke Park Farm consultation and report. I'm going to ask, is it going to be Rory first? Yes. I'm going to ask Rory to present the report. Thank you, Rory. Thank you, Alex, for your assistance on the last item, and thank you, Rory and Paul, for your patience in getting to this part of the meeting. Oh yes, and if anybody would like to leave, always do feel free. Goodbye. Okay, over to you, Rory. Sorry, Rory, could you put your microphone on?
Wonderful. So I was asked to produce and share a presentation to summarise the consultation related to Stoke Park Farm. So I'll try and run through, and the intention is, or there are a couple of slides to focus on, particularly a Great Crested Newt scheme, who Paul and Anna-Marie will share some of that information. And if you have any questions, I'm sure there'll be time at the end. So, Stoke Park Farm. Just to, I do apologise. Did anyone else have problems?
Are we in slideshow at the moment?
We're in slideshow.
We're in slideshow, or you're in edit. It's editing and it won't change. You need to go into the slideshow, which I think is that button.
Yeah, same as that one.
So are we not? You're still not working?
No, don't worry. I will find a way.
Is that what you did? Did you close the program? Oh, it could be because it's open on that screen.
That's fine. I can do it from here. There you go. No problem. Stoke Park Farm. So, very, very briefly, East Borough Council acquired the site in 2022, April last year. The management aligns with a nitrate offset scheme, so we effectively cut the grass once a year and cut the hedges once a year. So it's very much minimal intervention in terms of management. Aside and alongside the nitrate scheme, we've been looking for additional and varied opportunities for the nitrate land as a whole, which led to myself producing a initial proposal for Stoke Park Farm. So the initial proposal was taken to Cabinet, I believe, last October, and it was agreed at Cabinet that it would be sent out for consultation. The initial proposal looked or aimed to capture 4 key ambitions: to support health, well-being and cohesion within the community, enrich, upskill and educate, restore, protect and enhance the environment, and also ensure that it was financially viable. So the consultation process was just over 3 months, from December 2022 to the end of March 2023. Its aim was to capture the thoughts of the local community, so the residents, local councillors, the parish councils, Eastleigh Borough Council internal departments, community groups, education providers, existing tenants and adjacent landowners or operators. There was a questionnaire live for that term, so we had, I think, 260 odd responses and a handful of responses from local groups and organisations, including Biffo. Fair Oak and Horton Heath and Bishopstoke Parish Council were invited for a walk and talk. Not a huge number attended, but it was useful nevertheless, and I assisted with various inquiries that came through via email and by phone. So, which led me to the report and consultation. I think there are 105 pages. associated with the report, so it took some time. So I'm hopeful that my report on the consultation was reflective on the appendices that were attached to it. So part of the consultation report was a series of recommendations which I've very much summarised here, just so I can get them onto one slide. So to summarise them, business case. And of course we need to ensure that any scheme within the farm is feasible on a case-by-case basis. Recommendation related to SANG, which is public open space. The recommendation is to progress with planning and ideally implementation of that. Great crested newt habitat. So recommendation within my initial report is very much looking to regional enhancement schemes, but actually the GCN habitat has actually sort of almost come alongside that, so it's certainly picked up within that point. Biodiversity net gain, to compile surveys and management plans to explore environmental enhancements. Again, we'd already engaged with a consultant to look into preliminary ecological appraisals and biodiversity net gain prior to the consultation process. So really it's just the recommendation is to look further into that. A couple on traffic movement and vehicular access. To consider alternative routes, which we continue to look at potential options, consider improvements to the existing track, and consider increased contributions towards Seawall Drive if we choose as a council to do other things there, and importantly with the traffic movement to be reflective of those that could have been generated from lawful use of the dairy farm prior to our ownership. Another recommendation, there's a long list, explore funding and other opportunities associated with environmental enhancements, with education, arts, craft and community engagement. The initial proposal was, it was very much an outline, so I feel that it's important that we explore some of these things further before making a final decision. Building assessment, review condition for repairs, improvements and or demolition, and explore potential uses. We conducted, as part of the due diligence process, we conducted surveys, condition surveys and topography surveys, measured surveys. But for me to explore how we can potentially use those and what that might look like and what traffic may or may not be generated, I think to commit to that exploration exercise would be invaluable. Install fencing gates to field parcels as required. It's a non-brainer, and in terms of land management, it's something we need to do. Develop a strategic vision with appropriate management plans which are reflective of the involving enhancements. A parcel of land such as this, you know, I feel they should be places that evolve as opposed to doing everything here and now. You know, as things materialise, we should be looking at how we can enhance and improve the area. Establish feasible improvements to the network of existing rights of way. It's very important for particularly the councillors to realise that there's a degree of responsibility from Hampshire County Council, and there are limitations at certain times as to what we can do. But you know, it's been noted that improvements are necessary to improve connectivity surrounding those. And finally, nature reserve. I don't feel that we should create a nature reserve here and now, but I do feel that with gradual environmental enhancements, we should continue to monitor and review and aspire to create such an environment. But I'm sure we can answer some questions on that later. So that summarises the recommendations. I'm hopeful that I've got them all there. Okay. Now's your cue.
Thanks, Rory. Hello, is that working? Yeah. Thanks, Rory, and thanks, Anna-Marie, for coming along and supporting us tonight from the New Conservation Partnership. One of the options that we've been exploring has come out of basically a change in legislation, so the way we deal with protected species, and in this case, great-crested newts, which is a European protected species. The UK actually has quite an important role in the whole global population of great-crested newts. We have quite a high percentage of the global population. So district-level licensing it's an alternative approach to the way we used to deal with protected species and licensing for great-crested newts in the past. So it has more of an emphasis on landscape-scale conservation rather than protecting individual newts. It's being rolled out to all counties in England. Some counties have already had it. Hampshire has gone live actually in the last couple of weeks. But as part of that process, all the interested authorities in Hampshire that are affected by great-crested newts that have signed up are working with Nature Space, who are delivering the district level licence on behalf of, they're an accredited agency, on behalf of Natural England. And as part of that, there is a delivery arm of strategic habitat compensation, which is where the New Conservation Partnership come in. They are the strategic delivery arm of that conservation, of that habitat creation. So we worked with Anna-Marie and her team at the NCP, exploring what opportunities there may be in Eastleigh by looking at strategic opportunity mapping. So basically looking at where existing population of great-crested newts are, where those opportunities lie in terms of landscape connectivity, soil type, and that's all put into kind of opportunity mapping. And after exploring a few options, the favoured one, the most appropriate, was the northeast parcel at Stoke Park Farm. And effectively what we're working towards is delivering 100% fully funded scheme. It's funded under the district level licensing scheme. So it's at no cost to Eastleigh Borough Council. And the habitat creation, so the capital costs and creation is dealt with by the NCP. We are then paid a sum of money each year annually for 25 years, as a 25-year agreement, to manage the habitat and the ponds. So what we're proposing at the moment as an outline is around about 7 ponds, and to create some terrestrial habitat associated with that. So it'll be things like grassland enhancement, tree planting, hedgerow creation. I'd like to see some scrub allowed to develop. And as I say, the applications are at zero cost to EPC, but of course there is a resource element into that, hence the cost, so we will have to manage it to an agreed management plan. It's probably useful to say at this point that as well as benefiting great-crested newts as the ultimate ambition, so natural colonisation, of course, the creation of the habitat and the ponds themselves has much wider benefits for biodiversity. And of course, it fits in with the aims of the overall consultation and the outcomes from that. Have I missed anything, Anna-Marie, at this point?
I don't think so. That sounds very comprehensive. I'll just maybe say, so New Conservation Partnership gets all of its funding from developers. So when developers use this regional district licence, they pay a fee, and a portion of that fee comes across to New Conservation Partnership. Some of that money is used directly for the pond creation, and some of it goes into a management fund, which then guarantees the payments to the participating landowners, the compensation providers, for the length of their agreement.
Thank you very much. We've got no one to speak on this subject. Oh, are there? Sorry. I thought we just got...
Sorry, Lou, there's more. There's more.
Wow, crack on. Thank you.
So the farm's just over 100 hectares. The site proposed for the Great Crested Newt habitat creation is 8 hectares. So it's a nice proportion of the site for that purpose. So moving on, one of the other recommendations was SANG, Suitable Alternative Natural Green Space. So this is effectively New Forest mitigation. The criteria is guided by Natural England, and it will form a 80-year agreement. So a term of 80 years that we can't do anything other than public access. The proposed area for the SANG, for the public access, is 20 hectares, so 1/5 of Stoke Park Farm. It'll incorporate, as per Natural England's criteria, 2.4 circular walking route with appropriate terrain, links to existing rights of way, bins, benches, signage, a small car park, I believe 10 to 20 spaces, and it will pick up on environmental enhancements. So you'll have species-rich grasslands, some scrub, some natural regeneration or wilded areas, some tree, hedgerow, and I say woodland, parkland tree planting, I suspect. Similar to the Great Crested Newt habitat creation, there are biodiversity and community benefits for it, and there's potentially additional biodiversity net gain credit available, which I'll come on to after. The SANG would be funded in terms of capital and maintenance and monitoring for the 80-year term via developer credits. And I probably just said this, but the remaining land, so the other 80 hectares of Stoke Park Farm, should, I feel, be restricted to public access to allow wildlife and such habitats to thrive. So, just for information, biodiversity net gain. So, Paul, I'm sure will answer some questions on this, but as part of the Environment Act, B&G will be mandatory from November 2023 for particular size developments, and it will ensure a 10% biodiversity net gain uplift. Land that's allocated for B&G is tied to a 30-year agreement. So with biodiversity net gain, where you can, it would be delivered on-site. However, if all on-site options are exhausted, then there's potential to purchase credits for delivery off-site. So a developer purchases the credits from the landowner or an organisation, and then the 10% is delivered off-site. The potential with Stoke Park Farm, preliminary ecological appraisals and report and the biodiversity net gain baseline has been assessed. So we've, in a draft form, so we're developing an understanding as to what our opportunities are there, and we're developing a costed scheme. As I said before, it's funded, the capital and management of it is funded for 30 years, and I've got there B&G equals habitat enhancements. I'm not sure whether that's the right terminology, but again, similar to the SANG, grassland improvements, tree and hedgerow planting, ponds and or wetlands. The opportunities for the delivery of biodiversity net gain are two, I believe. One is via Eastleigh Borough Council as a self-delivery. The other opportunity may be to enter it into a regional scheme. So there are organisations at the moment that are looking to lease land for biodiversity net gain. So they lease from the landowner and do all the lovely things. So there are likely to be a couple of options to consider there. And that is it. I'm ready for questions now, Lou.
Okay. Members, do any members have any questions? Councillor Tidridge.
Thank you, and thank you to all three of you for such
Sorry, Councillor Tidridge, this wasn't on my list. It wasn't on my list, but apparently we do have a statement that needs to be read out.
Cool, I shall hold fire.
So we will hold fire and allow the statement to be read out. Then your question, be poised. I've got lots.
Apologies, members.
Sorry.
We have been asked to have this statement read out. It's from a Mr. Terry Crow and Mr. George Baker on behalf of Friends of Wilden Local Nature Reserve. So they have said, we note that Cabinet will consider a recommendation for the development of Stoke Park Farm at their meeting scheduled for the 6th of July 2023. The Friends of Wilden Nature Reserve have reviewed this document and believe the following three issues must be included in the recommendation. Firstly, we would like to confirm our full support for the stated ambition, item 4, to restore, protect and enhance the natural environment. As part of the public consultation process, we have submitted an extensive list of comments and suggestions based on our 5 years of experience at the Wilden Local Nature Reserve in Hedge End. The three issues we believe must be included in the recommendation are as follows. 1. A commitment to apply to Natural England for formal local nature reserve status for the whole site. The local nature reserve status will provide additional long-term protection to the natural environment and be supported by a management plan that details the objectives to protect and enhance the biodiversity while creating an environment to improve the health and well-being within the local community. The establishment of a local nature reserve is also supported by the Bishopstoke Local Area Committee and the ADD in their submissions to the public consultation. 2. A commitment to work with the fish farm tenant to ensure the use of environmentally friendly working practices that fully protect the local biodiversity and for the tenant to commit to the management plan for the local nature reserve. We believe the fish farm, with its associated ponds and links to the River Itchen tributary running through the farm, must be included in the overall management plan for the site. This commitment is part of the initial recommendation agreed by the Cabinet in October 2022, but has not been included in the recommendation dated 6th of July 2023. 3. A commitment to complete an extensive preliminary environmental assessment of the farm and surrounding areas to establish the historical records for priority species recorded in the area. We have addressed this issue as item 1 in our public consultation submission and referred to the 951 species recorded within a 2-kilometre radius of the site. Included in this list is the European eel recorded in 2011 and 2014, which is classified as critically endangered, plus important records of great crested newts, 21 records, southern damselfly, 132 records, purple emperor butterfly, 1 record, and hazel dormice, 5 records. We believe it is essential for a preliminary environmental assessment to be conducted, supported by additional species surveys as required, before commitments are made on the site layout for this site. Of particular concern is the long-term protection of the Itchen River tributary and priority species using this watercourse. Will you please include these three issues into the recommendation for the development of Stoke Park Farm? Thank you.
Thank you. And if you allow me for 2 seconds before I bring you in, Councillor Tidridge, that statement was sent to myself as well as Cabinet, and because Cabinet were passing the recommendations for consideration here first, I felt it was appropriate that we should hear them so that we can make sure, if we feel they're appropriate, that they're included to go back to Cabinet. Hence, I asked if they wouldn't mind it being read out at this meeting, just to put it into context for everybody. Councillor Tidridge.
A very quick moment, just so I can share my comments with yourself.
So it's really for members to make a decision on whether those comments. It's the same as when we have. You can when it's your question time, exactly. But there is a difference, which is this is a formal meeting still, and we should follow the procedure, which is that we ask questions now. So, Councillor Tidridge, who's been very patient.
Which is unusual. So, first of all, big thank you. Fabulous report, fabulous piece of work, really interested, very excited about the newts. Just a couple of questions though. I understand that there are a lot of qualifying bits and pieces around being a SANG. To qualify as a SANG, this doesn't look like it's what I thought a SANG would be in terms of something that's competing with the New Forest. Have I got that right in terms of level of attraction? I just want to make sure that we have absolutely dotted every I and crossed every T if the intention is to have this as a SANG.
Yeah. So if somebody can answer Councillor Tidridge.
Yes, thank you. So there's a process to go through with Natural England with the SANG. So there will be a consultee on the planning application, which is imminent in the next 3 to 4 weeks. There is also the potential to engage in a kind of pseudo pre-app with Natural England, where effectively they agree the layout, costings, a long-term management plan, and then they submit a letter of comfort that it qualifies, it meets the minimum criteria as a SANG, pending certain recommendations, and then therefore they will no comment the planning application. But the idea of the SANG is it's not to replicate the New Forest. It is to draw recreational pressure away so that people don't make the journey to the New Forest. So it doesn't necessarily need to look like the New Forest, but it's based there. There are lots of SANG systems in place for a lot of other European protected sites, so things like the Thames Basin Heath. So if they draw visits away, so with an attractive feature, a view, a walk that's available all year round, then the idea is being that they draw some of that recreational pressure away rather than people going to the New Forest. So it's that sign off, it's processing that so that it meets the minimum requirements for Natural England that we'll do through the planning process.
Thank you. I've got two subsequent questions. This is what happens when I have to wait to ask my questions. I come up with more. So the second question is, this committee has already expressed its desire for the site to become a nature reserve. I don't think, I certainly haven't changed my view on this. I don't think anybody on this committee, certainly I wouldn't have any problem with it being a longer term objective as opposed to something that happens in the short term. I just want to check that, is there any issue if this becomes a SANG? Is that still congruent with this committee's clearly expressed desire for this site to become a nature reserve in the longer term?
Just to say, I'm fully supportive of the process as well of getting this designated as a local nature reserve. Something I'm really keen on, and I think it's going to meet all of those criteria. No, there's no conflict between the designation as a local nature reserve and SANG. Local nature reserves in themselves have an element of people and community engagement and community access. So that element of the SANG works perfectly with the designation as a local nature reserve. There wouldn't be a problem with that.
Cool. Third question, I think it's my last one, which is, I'd just really like to know from Rory, have you been able to pick up with Forestry England and Woodland Trust in terms of involving them with conversations about what has with Stoke Park Farm as near neighbours who have adjacent habitats. The badgers don't know which bits belong to the Woodland Trust and which bits belong to Stoke Park Farm, and very much how the area is perceived by local residents is very much it's one big lovely space, and one big lovely space, which is why we all got so upset when we thought it was going to be turned into housing. Has there been consultation with the Woodland Trust and Forestry England as important neighbours with similar or with complementary aims?
So in terms of consultation feedback, the Woodland Trust did. They provided some, valuable feedback. The Forestry Commission or Forestry England, they weren't great at replying to the consultation process. However, I've met with their, I'll say Bear, a regional, one of their regional managers that looks after the woodland there, and he suggested various opportunities, which may be, again, it may be a form of lease, where they lease some land, plant some trees and manage those trees, or there may be other initiatives and other funding. One of our colleagues is looking into a tree planting initiative, so again that will form part of that level of detail. But some initial, I know there's lots of talk about an infill between Upper Barn and Cllr Caws and Stoke Park Woods, and I think I've expressed before that planting to a degree I think is favoured from both sides, north and south of us, but it's important to keep a glade, a clearing of some form there. So,
Any more questions? Councillor Marsh.
Well, it's starting off with a bit of a statement, which it feels really bizarre to be discussing this at all, considering we were at council where we were told this was an LAC decision, and then I think we came as an LAC and we said we want a nature reserve, and then we were told, oops, sorry, no, it can't be an LAC decision, so somebody else greater than us will decide for us what we're going to do. I'm guessing that's Cabinet, because it's nice that they've come back to us to ask us what we want to do before they go ahead and do whatever they're going to do anyhow. So this is starting off on a slightly negative footing because all we wanted was a nature reserve. So that's my starting point of this. So actually a comment is, and sorry, I know this sounds more like debate, but I'm thrilled to see the conservation of the newts. That's amazing. And that's exactly the spirit of what we wanted for this piece of land, that it could be enjoyed by local residents without being bombarded, without masses of traffic, without lots of business and traffic happening. We want it to be a protected space for our community and our residents. I thought that the statement that was read out made a lot of sense, and I wondered, Rory, whether you could tell us what your views were about those, because those points seem to make perfect sense. So would you like to respond to those?
I think the nature reserve aspiration has probably been answered, so I won't cover that. So there were two other. The PEA, I think, was referenced as a preliminary environmental appraisal. I believe they mean a preliminary ecological appraisal. So, as I said within the presentation, we've already been through that process. We've gathered that data, the desk surveys, the walkover surveys have been done, and we've stepped forward a little bit with the biodiversity net gain. So, of the 3 points raised, I think that's nature reserve and the PEA covered. Fish farm. So the fish farm is a commercial operation. So that's a commercial lease. So as a landowner, there is we're limited as to the amount we can enforce them to do. However, working with them, they've already engaged with us. So during the acquisition of the farm, we looked into nitrate and phosphate discharge, and it was assumed, as a lot of people do, that the fish farm, the levels from the fish farm were quite high. Over the last year, we've had a chance to send a consultant to the fish farm, and what we've established is those nitrate and phosphate discharge levels are much lower than was originally anticipated. And again, engaging with the fish farm, and I wouldn't necessarily hold it to them, they're supportive of being involved. They're running a community, a guided tour for the local community next month, and although I've not quite sent the invite out yet, there is one that will be orientated towards local councillors and Heath Borough Council employees. So it's really worthwhile to actually see the positives of the fish farm as opposed to the negative that we tend to paint them with as a whole. So you know, by all means we can look further into the environmental side of things, but I feel that you know, they're certainly working on the right side.
Can I just add a little bit there about the protected species that was brought up? So we have to be a little bit careful with when we look at the biological records. We have access to all of that as well, and not all the 951 records will be relevant directly to Stoke Park Farm. So they come from within the area. So things like southern damselflies are associated with the itching. There may be incidental individual records of individuals that drift, but they're not present on Stoke Park Farm. So each element that we'll be working with, so the Great Crested Newt habitat creation, BNG, the SANG, each one of those elements will take into account the protected species constraints and opportunities, and we'll be working with it. Anything we are proposing will be to enhance and deliver more protected species, more habitat for them, and work with it. And we're certainly not proposing to do anything to the Bow Lake corridor, again, only to enhance and protect, and to make that better, and to consider the protected species that are relevant to the site.
Councillor Caws?
Thank you for that, Paul. It's quite nice to see that you actually exist. I keep hearing about Eastleigh Borough Council's ecology team, and I've always wondered who they were, and you appear to be the head of it, is that? Or?
Very recently, for about 12 days.
Oh, okay. And is it a large team?
It's ecology and tree, so there are 3 ecologists. There's myself and Lisa Malta and Sarah Boyd, who are both 3 days a week. They deal much more with the kind of daily churn of planning applications, whereas I kind of have a bit more of an overview of the strategic projects. I've also inherited the tree team, which is now a tree surveyor, who is Irina, and we also use Chris Stringer as a consultant, but we're currently looking to recruit 2 permanent tree officers to add to the team. So yeah, we're new and part of the new green spaces team.
Thank you. So as you have already conducted the baseline ecological survey, is there any data on what actually is present at Stoke Park Farm? You said not all of the 951 species are, but is there a way to see what is?
We can certainly share the preliminary ecological appraisal. That won't have done all of the secondary surveys, so as things like the SANG come forward, I know they've done a survey for breeding birds, which will come forward as part of the planning application. But the preliminary ecological appraisal will have been shared with all the protected species records we've got relevant to that will be included in that.
So we can have access to that?
You can see, yeah, there's no reason not to be able to see
and
that.
who will do the bird breeding survey?
I'm not sure who the ecologists are that are working on that, if I'm perfectly honest, but they would have done a breeding bird survey, I think, as part of the SANG planning application.
Thank you.
Any other questions before I ask Councillor Tidridge?
Sorry, more questions. There's been a few incidents or starting to be evidence at Stoke Park Farm of perhaps some visitors to the farm taking a somewhat liberal view to it being under public ownership and thinking that this means that they can go anywhere. I had one particularly concerning report of a driver driving all the way through the farm, up the hill, all the way to the southeast corner of Upper Barn Copse, just so she could easily get to the bluebells, which seemed to be a remarkably weird approach, but hey. So that's happened. I'm also seeing people walking and creating, is the phrase desire line, where you see a path kind of evolve. There's a lot of that, there's always been a degree of that, and I think it's getting more obvious in various areas. And also, particularly at the north side of Upper Barn Copse, the join-up bit between the footpath and the woodland trust wood has always been a little bit vague. How you get there as a pedestrian, if you're walking from Stoke Park Farm into Upper Barn Copse from the north, there's again desire line paths going under the pylons, stuff like that. I can understand wanting to restrict the public access area to being, this is the area that the public enjoy, but I think we may, my question is, very long question, sorry, is have we considered adding in small areas of path to maybe try and mitigate some of these areas where we're getting informal paths happen? Are we looking at taking action to stop car drivers driving all the way across the site because they want to see the bluebells or any other reason? And just really trying to get it so that we've got, we're making it easier for people to do what we'd like them to be doing within that space.
So I think the vehicles, so we've got AMPR, which is useful. So if anything's reported, then we can have a look at that. One of the recommendations looks into fencing and gates, which sounds silly on a farm, but all the fencing was electric fencing. I mean, the boundary with Upper Barn, we could potentially talk to the Woodland Trust and see what their view is. I know a couple of years ago they shut a section off due to ash dieback with some felling. So it's a discussion we can have. I mean, one of the benefits of the SANG is that the people that are using some of the fields, if you like, to actually offer them somewhere to go is much easier than just shutting a gate. But yes, and I think with the SANG, we'll effectively be encouraging vehicles onto the site to an extent, to a car park, which forms part of the criteria. So I think at that point, I think restrictions to vehicles going up to the farm and beyond, I think is probably going to be really important to form part of that.
Okay, have you got another question? Carry on. Councillor Caws.
So, Rory, talking about parking, that's another question that I have. So I've heard different, I mean, according to the guidelines, 2021 Natural England criteria for a SANG, it says that there should be adequate parking if the area is larger than 4 hectares, which it obviously is, being 20. So it just seems that there's lots of different numbers banding around. I've heard 15. On the report, it says 10 to 20. There was one of the public consultations, you said 40. It's just, I'm just worried that it might be getting out of control and not being confined to a certain number, and just, it might grow and grow and yeah, more traffic, which is not the point of it.
So I think the initial proposal was very much looking at the farm in its existing form, and it was utilising, if I remember, the car park formed part of the built form, if you like. And what it said was there was an area to facilitate 40 cars. That wasn't to suggest 40 cars were for SANG or public access. It was just saying that that is the space, that is what it can hold. When we then start to move on to the SANG criteria, it is very much my understanding is 10 to 20 cars. So 10 to 20 cars, bang in the middle is 15. So I believe for the SANG, between 10 and 20 cars is probably what the focus will be on for a site of that size.
And do you know that that is considered adequate parking by Natural England for the 20 hectares of space available?
I think reverting back to what Paul said, they will be obviously involved in any decision, and I'm sure that the adequate parking will form part of that.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions, mainly on the sang, I have to confess. The first one is about car parking, and actually I think given that we should now be massively moving towards the use of public transport, sustainable transport, and encouraging people to access the countryside by whether they cycle or whether they walk. There's lots of ways of doing it. The Natural England guidelines were suggesting that sangs should be placed near developments so that people could get to them within a couple of kilometres. Now, this is an area that is predicted to have houses built anymore around there. And it's usually based on headcount per 1,000 of the population. So I'm just wondering, is there a position by Eastleigh to put excessive housing around this area that is going to require a sang in this location? That's one question. My second question is, there's concern, particularly by Natural England, that sangs have become glorified dog bins, basically, that people arrive, they literally open their car doors and they let their dogs go everywhere. Because that area that you showed on the map, that has deer in it, it has wildlife in it, it has birds in it, and you're going to introduce into an area which currently has 0 dogs. And I say currently because actually we do have some people who are irresponsible and have allowed their dogs to chase the deer, and I have evidence of that. So we are going to start displacing our existing wildlife with this position of this sang. So have we looked at what wildlife currently uses that space and how it will be displaced and what the impact is? And I believe Natural England also automatically assumes that if you have a sang, it will have a natural biodiversity net gain of 10% by definition, which is not to be confused with biodiversity net gain, which developers are required. And developers should, wherever possible, seek to increase biodiversity net gain on site rather than off, looking at the new green infrastructure thing. So they're the concerns I have. I have some more, which I will come back to in a second, but I am concerned about the sang, its location, and what it's trying to achieve.
I probably don't know enough to answer the location one, but I'll try. So the location of it sits effectively on the border between Bishopstoke and Fair Oak. So arguably quite well placed, serving both parishes. It's just on the boundary line, just the left of the boundary line. As far as I'm aware, a sang will effectively, where a sang might be, it will take a radius. I don't believe there's any development that is planned on your doorstep. It's not a department that I sit within, but I don't believe it's focused on imminent development.
I can just add to that there's a strategic element. So there's a draw, and the location. We've had an initial meeting with Natural England at Stoke Park Farm and showed them the site in terms of suitability. So there's a high point and a vista, which is a natural draw. And of course, in terms of the function of the sang, to draw away recreational visits, to give some people somewhere to recreate before they get in their car and drive somewhere else, it doesn't have to be new residents that you're doing. You can engage existing residents to do that. That has the same net result in reducing people making long distance journeys to the New Forest, so it doesn't have to be associated with new housing necessarily. And in terms of the protected species on the site, the sang application is looking at the potential impact on protected species and what that means. But in the wider context, the habitat will be enhanced. And although the primary Natural England can't have concerns about dogs being off-lead in sangs because that's the primary function of a sang. So the whole point of a sang is that you can go there and you can let your dog off the lead safely, so they don't do it in the New Forest. So we will look at it, but there are ways of managing that. So if you allow the habitat to develop, so you allow the grassland structure, you allow some scrub, some planting, and you have you actually create the all-weather desire lines and the walks. You know, you can kind of manage people that way as well.
Thank you. The newts are... sorry, Councillor Tidridge, ask your question.
Very, very quick question. So is my understanding that in a sang, you have to be able to have your dog off the lead? Is that part of the definition? Because that puts a completely different complexion on it as a runner who dislikes interacting with loose dogs attacking me, which has happened. That does kind of, from a personal perspective, slightly colour my view of the sang.
Yeah, it is somewhere where dog owners should feel that they can walk their dog and let their dog off the lead, rather than doing it in the sites that we're trying to protect. So rather than digging the New Forest, their dog still has to be under effective control. Yeah, it's not a free-for-all. You can't just let them savage runners and other people that are using it. But my experience of working on them previously in the Thames Basin Heath is that actually, depending on how you develop the habitat and you allow it, not all of the areas necessarily need to be physically accessible. You can still feel you're accessing and accessible to somewhere if you can see it and if you can engage in it even from a distance. So where you allow scrub to develop, the dogs won't go in there. And also you can manage the habitat, manipulate the habitat, so you can have some areas where the grass is perhaps mown shorter, where they can throw the ball for the dog. And what you'll find then where you've got longer walks is, and you have intermediate walks, a lot of them will perhaps do the shorter walks, and as you get further and further away, in fact, less and less people penetrate. But the fact that it is accessible means that it can qualify as sang. If it's not accessible, then it doesn't qualify. It can't be within the sang boundary.
So, are there any other questions before we move into debate? Is that a question? Yeah.
Yeah, so my question's about the biodiversity net gain credits. It seems like you are wanting to do that in the future, but I was of the understanding that it takes quite a lot of expertise and manpower to kind of put that into action. When you have the money, you need to do a lot of stuff, and I just wanted to be reassured that there is that possibility, and within the team that the council currently has, that would be a possibility.
No, it's a good question, and you're absolutely right. Yes, in terms of the management for biodiversity net gain, there will be certain standards. So you'll have a management and monitoring plan which will cover 30 years. You have certain targets to meet, so the habitat would have to be managed to that. But that's all costed up. So you have what we're working on at the moment with the consultants is the costed scheme, so delivering the capital works, what it costs to do all of that 30 years, including what it costs in terms of staff resource. So I think it's fair to say we don't have the staff resource at the moment within the newly formed Neighbourhoods and Green Spaces team. However, we've got the vacancies, and we have, with that additional funding, that provides the money for us then to employ the people to actually undertake that work. So it's kind of, it's part of that wider process.
Okay. Any more questions? Can I open it up to debate? So I'm going to need a proposer and a seconder to move the recommendations that are on page 55 of your pack. I was going to ask somebody to put it up on the, can we get it up on the screen? But don't forget, it also refers to paragraph 9 and the sub-clauses at that section. So if I can have a proposer, please. Councillor Tidridge and a seconder. Cllr Caws, thank you. We'll move into debate. Councillor Marsh.
It's partially an observation, really. A lot of people have put a lot of effort into these consultation, into the process. As a parish councillor, I think that the work that was done by the parish councils, they've put together some comprehensive feedback about what they feel should and shouldn't be in the area. So, for example, not having a tea room. And really, it's an observation that I hope that we won't just pay lip service to the consultation process, that we will genuinely listen, particularly where a body like the Parish Council have come together and got the views from a number of people and represented those. And I hope that we do this in a way that makes us proud, because it is something we wanted. We wanted to protect this area. And I just hope that we pay more than lip service to it.
Councillor Tidridge.
Completely agree with you, Michelle. My observations, I know that the residents of Cllr Drive have been terrified about some of the talk of a 40-space car park. And I've had residents on Cllr Drive area telling me how it's great seeing that their kids can play out on the street in quite an old-fashioned way without fear of being run over. And anything that changes that would be quite sad. It's something that the residents there enjoy doing, and I would hate to see an estate that was just not designed to have a through road going through it. Wasn't designed for that. You can improve the road all you like, but that won't get around the fact that the whole layout of the estate, the design of it, was never designed to be a through road. And certainly we've made our position very clear as a committee with the feedback we gave to the consultation that the level of traffic should be no more than was actually experienced when it was operating as a dairy farm. I don't mean lawful use, I mean what was actually happening there, which was the milk lorry coming twice, is it once or twice a day? Yeah. So, but a very low number of vehicle movements. I've lived in that area of Bishopstoke since 1994. Obviously, I'm a newcomer compared to Lou. But when it was operating as a farm, I never perceived there being a very high number of vehicle movements. And I think that should be a benchmark for what we stick to, which is no more than it was when it was operating as a farm. The second thing I would like to see going into the recommendations is to remind Cabinet that this committee has passed a motion that we feel that the Stoke Park Farm should become a local nature reserve. And I'm really chuffed to hear that the SANG proposal doesn't necessarily challenge that. And it would be good to see the SANG develop in such a way that does enable that to happen. Personally, I'm easy on the timescale for the nature reserve, but obviously sooner would be better. But I just think we do need to remind Cabinet. We wanted to discuss this at full council. And we were told it was an LAC decision. Well, as an LAC, we took a decision. And that decision was this should be a local nature reserve. And we need to make that very clear to Cabinet that that is a decision that we have taken and we have stuck to going through. And I'm really pleased to see that when you look at the overall report, I have a few reservations about the SANG. I've still got in my head being chased by a dog round all 2.4 kilometres, which might mean I achieve a personal best for my loop of that. But hopefully dog owners will be responsible and keep them under control. But overall, I'm really excited about this proposal. And I think it really does reflect a very positive move forward for the farm in a way that will be of massive benefit to the community. Little bits I think still need a bit of tying up, in particular accessing the site as a pedestrian, as a cyclist, as a horse rider, from not only the Cllr Drive side but also the Crowd Hill side. The interactions pathwise and access-wise between the Woodland Trust, Upper Barn Copse in particular, Crowd Hill Copse and Stoke Park Woods, I think maybe there's a little bit more work to do there in terms of ensuring that things join up in a way that people are using the paths we'd like them to use, using the routes we'd like them to use, and aren't going to kind of freestyle in terms of creating their own routes there. And certainly one of the things I really want to see with the site is good communication to members of the public on the site that this is why you can go here. This is a great place for you to go. this is why there's a fence here that means you can't get into that bit, but hey, there's some fantastic stuff going on with wildlife there. And I'm hoping as well that there will be plans as well for engaging with that wildlife in a very controlled, responsible way. For example, birding groups, wildlife groups, forest schools, all that kind of thing, in terms of enabling people to get a really rich benefit of interacting with that site. I'm really pleased, and I think you've done an amazing job, Rory, with pulling the report together, and I'm so excited about the new conservation partnership. But please, please remind Cabinet that we want this to be a local nature reserve in the long term. I'll stop talking.
I'll come back on that, Councillor Tidridge, because I was going to actually make that as one of the first recommendations, because actually we are going to recommend to Cabinet. Now, we've been given 4 recommendations for us to recommend to Cabinet, but that doesn't stop us putting in any other recommendations we wish to. And I'm going to be brutally honest, I'm hugely disappointed that it doesn't say up here straight away that the aspiration is this will become a nature reserve. Because that is what this committee asked for. It's what our residents are asking for. It came out in the consultation, and I think it does us a disservice that it doesn't figure at all into those top 4 recommendations. So I think this is something we can come back to as an amendment. Sorry, any more debate before I get into my debatey bit and get on my hobby horse? Councillor Couldrey.
Thank you. I think you're quite right to bring us back to the recommendation, because I think there's a lot there that's very productive. The first recommendation is is paragraph 9, which is a whole load of things, and the first thing is the creation of a SANG. Now, so I don't care whether it's called a SANG or a park, but the fact is that people want access to open space. If we put it all into tightly controlled areas, people can only go on the existing rights of way, etc., we're just going to have a problem. Much better to have a proportion of this land put aside for public right-of-way, public way, where they can walk their dogs without too much interference, etc. I accept there are problems with walking dogs, and some dogs are out of control, but that's not something that we can deal with here. So the creation of a SANG on the site seems to be a perfectly sensible way forward. I'm excited about the Great Crested Newt proposal. I think it's really, I'm about to say great, but I really can't pun that much. But it's really constructive and positive, and it gets us off to a good start. Hopefully there are going to be lots of other bits that are positive and helpful, but it's wonderful that we can bank something so early in the process. Now, after that, it becomes a bit woolly. Get more biodiversity net gain, yes, all for that, but I'm not quite sure how. More surveys. Buildings, I don't like the buildings there. They're pretty awful, and putting more buildings in or changing their use will just get more traffic. It's really, I think, not a way forward. I'm not terribly happy with that. And then, of course, make the existing right-of-way network work. So that seems to me a good basis for going forward. Yes, I entirely agree that I would like to see most of that site to become a nature reserve in due course. Don't think it's anywhere near at the moment. Don't think we can insist that it's we haven't got the money to get it up to that sort of level soon. So happy to have it as a long-term ambition, but it's not an immediate, I don't think we can get there quickly. The traffic movements, I agree, we need to keep down so far as we can. I'm sorry to hear the range 10 to 20. I'm sorry that SANGs have to have a car park at all. You have a car park. You have to have a car park. All I can do is ask that you try and persuade Natural England that the car park over past the cemetery, which I know is designated for another purpose, would be just as adequate as a car park there. And if you do have to have a car park, it might be better if it was 10 rather than 20, and so forth. So that's what the proposal says, and that's so far so good. I have, however, also looked at some of the submissions in there, and I largely agree with the response to the Friends of Wildwood's commitment, that it really doesn't add an awful lot to what's already there, so I don't think we need to get terribly excited about that one. The Ramblers Association, I thought, had some very good points. I liked, but the two extensions to the right-of-way network are not, I think, quite right. First one is going to be in the SANG already, so you don't need that. And the other one is, goes along the top of a hill on the border, and I think it'd be much more sensible to bring it down. And the reason for that is, I think that we need to have a circular route. People, at the moment, at the proposal, there's no circular route. People sort of asked to go down, they can walk one way, and then turn around and walk the same back. Now, that's not what people want to do. People want to go around and have a circuit. So you can bring a new right-of-way on the other side of the river from the farm buildings, connecting the two, well, one existing right-of-way and one actual right-of-way. And that would make a perfectly sensible round trip and would help keep the, keep people out of the more sensitive areas. I agree with ADD in saying that they need some sort of planting between Upper Barn Copse and Stoke Park Woods. Well, it's not Stoke Park Woods, it's Crowdell Spur, isn't it? And you do need some open space there as well. Great, fine, no problem with that. So really, I think that I'm broadly in favour of this. I'm perfectly happy to support an amendment that said we also want this the aspiration there to have a national park. Did you say no? A nature reserve. That's the one. Yes. Happy to support that, and so that's the end of my contribution. Yeah.
Any other debate? Councillor Caws.
So I actually walked through Stoke Park Farm coming here this evening, and while I also support nature reserve, you know, and it's really nice to see that the areas, Rory, that you're talking about are not on the plan for the new. I love the new. That's a brilliant idea, but the other areas that are not the SANG, that are not the new area, are still going to be, I think you said parkland, I wasn't really sure what that was, but I think you said plant, but yeah. Areas for nature, you know, that is amazing to see that there's so much of that land that will be for nature. Walking past the buildings, you know, what you've stated that you want to provide, and we do want it for the public as well, you know. I'm not saying we don't want people there, we just want nature, because I do realise that those buildings are looking pretty sad and they do need to be made use of. And while you want to provide additional amenities for people, I just want to make sure that that is not at the cost of the other aim, which is promoting, protecting, restoring and enhancing the natural environment. So yeah, basically, and just things that I know that a lot of this is based on money. You know, it has, and I understand that it has to be. You know, that you get money from there's already money from the nitrates. You get more money from the biodiversity net gain. You get money from the SANG by not having to pay the national New Forest National Park. I get it. You know, it does have to be financially viable, but I just want to make sure that there's a difference between financially viable and making money. That's it. But I think it is an exciting project.
Yeah, I agree. There's some really exciting things. I'm very excited about the newts. It's just a shame that the only thing we've got is newts at the moment. I would have loved to. I love the newts. Bring the newts to me. That's wonderful. But where are the plans for our meadowland and farmland birds? because I'm very concerned about the buildings going, because we have a nesting colony of swallows that come every year. They are massively on decline, and the RSPB this year was saying that because of their thirst, hundreds of them are dying. They are in danger of becoming another one of our birds on the critical list. We've ended up with 60 to 70% of our natural species from farmlands going since the 1970s. These are facts. I can show you all the RSP data and the BTO data if you would like. We could be having yellowhammers. We haven't really touched on what's going to happen to all the other areas. And what I'm hearing at the moment is literally all the money we're going to get from the developers, and we're going to then put it back into this area. So we're going to take the money from the developers, and we're going to do some nitrates. So we don't get our nature reserve, not because that's not what we should do. It's because that's not a good long-term plan, is it? If you want to build thousands and thousands of houses, you've got to do it carefully and quietly so that you can go, well, this year we've paid for that little piece over there to be developed and biodiversity, natural game uplifted. So I am worried. I am worried that we're taking far too long, and I think saying it's going to be an aspiration for it to be a nature reserve is because the aspiration will be in about, I don't know, 2130. Because that's how I feel that these things go. And I have concerns about Eastleigh managing this. I really do. And my concerns are heightened because I just found out that existing countryside that we own, that we thought was being managed on our behalf, isn't, because it's not paid for. So Eastleigh doesn't look after what it's already got. So I have concerns. I love the fact that we should be opening up space to people, but it shouldn't become somewhere that becomes sterile and drives out our natural wildlife, which is already there. So SANGs, I think, are a double-edged sword, because it's literally about saying, I mean, they often cite Itchen Valley Country Park as a SANG. And if you go there, frankly, that's horrible. There's too many people. There is far too many people. It's not a good space for nature. You know, you get there, there is just cars everywhere. There are people everywhere who literally fall out of their vehicles, and that's where they picnic. That's not healthy. It's not getting people to have good health and well-being. So I want some reassurance that if we're going down the route of having a SANG, that SANG is not going to become like that. That it's going to be a SANG that's sympathetic to its environment. And I am concerned about wanting to have lots of car movements going there and building a car park or taking down the barn, because I think the whole thing needs to be looked at holistically. And I most certainly will be putting forward an amendment that it was the will of this committee, and it still is the will of this committee, that it should be a proper, formally protected nature reserve. So I will propose that as a recommendation, but of course, so this is an additional recommendation. So I would like to propose that So so I'm most certainly going to be proposing that we get this more protected. And I want to see more plans. I want to see the management plan. I wanted that to be what was going to Cabinet, a proper management plan that says, in this area we're going to do this. And in this area we're going to do this. We're going to plant, thistles and food for overwintering migrant birds, and we're going to make it so that everything lives harmoniously, and these are the things we could attract into this space. And we're going to have yet more years of nothing really happening on the site, apart from our lovely newts, which we love. So that's don't fear, that's not in question. But I just wish we'd gone further, and that we were bringing to this committee to recommend to Cabinet a much more cohesive plan of what could be done to the area, the total area, and not just we're going to put 20 acres, 1/5 of it, to be just like a giant park, because I don't think that was really the aspiration that we started with. So I'm allowed to talk about this and then we have to get it formally written up. But I would like to think that we could put in an amendment to include the nature reserve and perhaps have a time frame on it, is what I'm thinking. Because if we just aspirational about it, it'll be, 3 generations after me that will be able to come and hold Eastleigh Borough to account on it. So I will get some advice as how that should be worded, and hopefully I'll get a seconder.
I was going to suggest, Chair, that we could put a provisional. I completely agree that we should be proposing that as an amendment. I also really like your idea of adding a time frame onto it. Can I propose that 10 years feels like a good start point?
I think that's an excellent idea, Councillor Tidridge. No, that's fine. Yes, I'm going to ask you to do it, Kitty, because I can't read that from here. I'm blind like a bat. Okay, members. So we've obviously moved and seconded the original motion, which we've just debated, and now our local area manager has and our legal advisor has artfully captured the comments made by members, because this was a request from Cabinet for us to provide our recommendations. So I'm going to ask Kitty to now read them out to you. So this is the amendment, which do I have to propose it and then Jim second it? Yeah, okay.
I will raise my voice if I have one.
Oh.
I forgot they were mobile. Right. So recommendation 1, approve the progression of proposals for Stoke Park Farm outlined in paragraph 9 of this report, which provide additional amenities and greater public access while promoting, protecting, restoring and enhancing the natural environment. 2, support the creation of a suitable alternative natural green space scheme on part of the site subject to planning permission, with a target that the SANG should be operational in spring 2024. 3, support the Council entering into a 25-year agreement with the Newt Conservation Partnership to create habitat and ponds for great crested newts, subject to planning permission, subject to feedback from the local area committee. Recommend that the level of vehicle movements does not exceed the actual vehicle movements of the site's use as a dairy farm immediately prior to acquisition by the Council. 5, a request for further protection of the site and clarification of the management plans for the whole site. 6, a reminder to Cabinet that Bishopstoke, Fair Oak and Horton Heath Local Area Committee passed a motion on the 9th of March 2022 that Stoke Park Farm should become a local nature reserve, and to suggest to Cabinet that this should be achieved within the next 10 years. 7, to recommend that the car parking spaces available should be reduced, or to explore whether existing car parking owned by Bishopstoke Parish Council can be used instead. 8, to recommend that there should be a retention of the barn-like structure to support the nesting swallows. And 9, to ask that Cabinet take account of the comprehensive feedback from Bishopstoke and Fair Oak Parish Councils. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So that's my proposed amendments. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Tidridge. Oh, sorry, Councillor Marsh. So now we can now debate the amendment. Would anybody like to debate the amendment? Councillor Couldrey.
I'm not quite sure. I haven't been able to get back to see what the amendments are. But the first one that I can see is that the vehicle movements will not exceed the actual vehicle movements of the site.
That's the recommendation.
Is immediately prior to the acquisition by the council. Well, first it wasn't being used as a farm immediately prior to acquisition by the council, as far as I'm aware. And so that's no traffic movements at all. It was shortly before, but not immediately before, and the cows went and the planning took ages, and it was all being flowed down. So I think that's pretty, I'm not sure what that means. So I'd much prefer to see the existing restriction. I'm happy to have the clarification of the management of the site. Yes, great. I'm not sure what the next bit means, but fine. I'm happy with the reminder to the cabinet because I'm not sure what it's going to do. But anyway, like number 7. Not entirely persuaded about number 8. And 9 is fine. I mean, it doesn't mean anything.
So your objection is to the word immediately?
Well, I think that there was a careful... I agree with the principle. I very much like...
Sorry, your microphone's not on, Councillor Couldrey.
I agree with the principle of keeping traffic down. I'm not sure what that one means, and therefore I'm a little reluctant to support it. I do think we should try and get the traffic parked on the other side of the development at Cllr Drive and people walk in. But I know that there may be technical objections to that. So that's, you know, I'm not going to... so those are real problems with that amendment. Not of the core of it, but the detail.
Councillor Tidridge.
Just very briefly, the farm was being used as a dairy farm pretty close to the acquisition by the council, but we could put the words 6 months prior to if we want to be absolutely certain.
I know this may sound strange, members, but we'll have to vote on this amendment before we could amend the amendment, if we wanted to amend the amendment.
6 months before, as opposed to immediately before.
Before we accept on that one, I would go with something like immediately before it ceased work as a dairy farm.
We've got to, Steve, we've got to accept this.
Well, yeah, but I mean, that would be my suggestion. It doesn't bring the council.
That's absolutely fine, and we have to vote on this amendment first, and then so we can. We've already accepted. It's a minor amendment, isn't it? It's that wording. Okay, so if we were to propose that, we propose that we amend our amendment to include the words immediately before. Just got legal advice, I'm allowed to do this, immediately before it ceased being a dairy farm, which covers Councillor Couldrey's and Councillor... Operating as a... Immediately before it ceased operating, then delete. Prior to acquisition by the council. Yeah. We're allowed to, so I can propose that amendment to our amendment. Jin, you have to second it. Jin seconds it. Right. Okay, so, is that correct? That's correct. So, with the amendment as it now stands, we move to a vote. All those in favour of accepting the proposed amendments? 5. Any against? Any abstentions? 1 abstention. Now we have to, because it's now, the amendment has passed, we now go back to vote on the original motion as amended. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? 1 abstention. Thank you very much, members. And thank you, officers, for your information and time. Much appreciated. Please feel free to leave if you want to. Don't sit there and feel you have to stay. I'm going to now move on to... does anybody want a break? Bye. Bye. Yeah, if you don't want to stay, feel free to go. I'm going to now move on to item 10, which is the financial management report. And I'm going to ask Kitty to present.
Bear with me just a second whilst I bring the reports up. For the sake of brevity, I won't present the report in any detail. Hopefully you've had the opportunity to read it. So instead I will read the recommendation, which is that it is recommended that the committee 1. Approves the revised deadline of the 12th of January 2024 for Bishopstoke Parish Council to complete the feasibility studies for the provision of a boardwalk at Bishopstoke Cemetery and to improve the water supply for the allotments at Underwood Road. And 2. Agrees that the lead local area manager provides a letter to the clerk of Bishopstoke Parish Council to confirm the terms of the funding arrangement. Thank you.
Okay, any questions, members? No. Councillor Broomfield.
Yeah, 2. First one is, why did it not happen? And the second thing is, considering that the expiry date of the first grant was the 1st of April and it's now the something or another of July, nearly the 13th in fact, when did the request to have the period extended come in?
In terms of the reason why the feasibility study hasn't been completed, I'm afraid I don't have an answer to that question. With regards to when the request was received, it would have been approximately 2 weeks ago.
Any other questions?
Well, yes, sorry, so we don't know why it didn't happen, and we didn't find out it didn't happen until 2.5 months after it should have happened. I'll just go,
That is correct. Okay, so I need a proposer, Councillor Tidridge, and a seconder, and then we can move to debate, because I have got a couple of things I would like to say. Okay, so I'm concerned that it's taken 7 months and we got no feedback that there was a problem early on, and I'm concerned that there's been a request for 6 months. This is the feasibility study. It's not the completion of the works. This is just to find out whether it's viable to actually do. So I am concerned, and I think we should actually, when we're writing about this, I think as a committee we should be reassured in a couple of months that the process has started and how progress is being made. So I think it's not just about informing the Bishopstoke Parish Council that yes or no, they have or haven't received their funding extension, but if they do, that this committee wants to have regular updates. And that's what I feel personally. Does anybody else have any thoughts? Councillor Broomfield.
I have to say, I don't want to be rude, but it sounds like a bit of a Fred Carno outfit to me. I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm fairly sure that if Fair Oak had been offered £10,000, they'd have snapped your hands off and spent it and done the job. I'm reluctant to extend this goodwill, and I really think that there ought to be, yes, I think we ought to ask questions about why it didn't happen, why it's taken so long for it to happen, before we hand over another cheque waiting to be signed. I just think we have a duty to spend money properly.
I don't disagree, but I think I hope that perhaps there is a new chair, so I hope there is a new sense of urgency in fulfilling the projects. Any other comments? Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, I agree with Steve. Sorry, Councillor Broomfield.
Oh, that's all right, Councillor.
There we go. But that being said, I don't want the residents to suffer because somebody didn't do what they should have done. So I think we need to move this forward, but with clear restrictions that it needs to be sorted this time round.
Any other debate? I don't need to write anything about that, do I? No. Excellent. So all those in favour? 3 of us, 4 of us, 5? Any against? Any abstentions? Okay, well, it's passed. And now we'll go on to the appointments to outside bodies. Okay, is this being presented by yourself again, Kitty? This is our last item. Well done, members. Can I ask you to present the report?
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'll just read the recommendation, which is, it is recommended that the Bishopstoke, Fair Oak and Horton Heath Local Area Committee make the appointment to Twynham's charities as set out in the report. I will just clarify that the appointment would be the appointee would be specifically named in the minutes of this meeting. Thank you.
Any questions? Can I have a proposer, please? Oh, goodness. Councillor Marsh, followed by Councillor Couldrey. Any debate? Okay, there's no debate. I'll move to the vote then. All for? You're allowed to vote for yourself. Okay, you're going to abstain. Okay, any against? Any abstentions? Thank you, Councillor Tidridge. Thank you. That brings our meeting to a close. I would just like to say thank you all so much, and our next meeting is due to be held on Wednesday the 27th of September at 7 p.m. here at Woodlands. Thank you. Good evening. I've got to go home to bed.